Chapter 238. These last words of Deputy Minister Zoe finally revealed a sliver of the pressure he was under. However, this enormous pressure was successfully transferred on Su Lu through these words. After he put down the phone, he was silent for a long time before resuming his work at the Nutshell Engineering Department. The Federation's new generation MX mecha development had always been carried out by the Nutshell Engineering Department alone. However, after the failure, the Federal Academy of Science had quickly discovered an opportunity in this matter. After seizing Professor Shin's core data, the Mecha Development Department had long since been naturally divided into two factions. The competition between the two sides would also indirectly affect the Federation's presidential election. No matter which side it was a bargaining chip that could not be given up. The competition between the two sides had actually always been hidden under the surface. It was only because of the variable known as Su Lu that the Academy of Science had felt anxious. That was why there had been that conflict on that rainy night, bringing this competition to the surface. In that conflict, the Port City Garrison Unit 8384 had officially taken over the security work of the Nutshell Engineering Department under the orders of the Department of National Defense. After this incident, the two sides had officially shed all pretense of cordiality. Sula knew that his role in the development of MX was no longer a secret. However, now that he had so many Federation soldiers protecting him, while he felt slightly restricted, he also felt much more relaxed. With the federal military, or at least a portion of the military strength, standing behind him, this sense of security was something he would never have imagined in the past. The military was loyal to the President and the Federation. Countless years of history and the monitoring of the Constitution could guarantee that this loyalty would never be mixed with anything else. However, it was still a large and privileged system, so the internal structure was still divided according to the divisions of the various military regions or the combat forces during the Great War years, divided into several large factions. Among these military factions, the most special and transcendent was naturally the Federation Space Warship Fleet led by that three-star female general. For groups of warships patrolled the peaceful stars of the universe, independent and natural. In addition, the federal military had 4 major military regions. Among them, the most advanced and powerful was naturally the 1st Military Region stationed on planet S1, and the 4th Military Region, which was perennially in a state of confrontation with the Empire. Every time he thought of the Federation's military deployment, as an orphan of Donglin, Su Li's heart would surge with complicated emotions. The Donglin region was also a part of the Federation, but there was only one garrison on Donglin, a barren resource system. There was also no terrifying external enemy like the Empire, so it was no wonder the Federation did not value Donglin. Was always by Su Li's side, an armored combat battalion led by Major Lan Xiaolong, belonging to Unit 8384. Unit 8384 was actually the 17 independent land-based armored division of the 1st Military Region. It was an ace division with a glorious tradition. Its position in the federal military was special because the god of war, Li Pifu, once came from this division. He once led this armored division in the war with the Empire, creating one legend after another. Many years ago, Li Pifu left the 17 Armored Division and rose to become the commander of the federal military. After finally living in seclusion, the Department of Defense and the 1st Military Region headquarters were endlessly distressed about how to arrange the 17 Armored Division. The political requirements of the Federation were destined to not let this legend be destroyed, just like how no one dared to let the god of war, Li Pifu, a statue-level figure, fail even once. Therefore, the 17 Armored Division was withdrawn from the front line of the West Woods to Planet S1 and became the main military force in the most prosperous city garrison of the Federation, Unit 8384. Since they wanted an undefeated legend, if they didn't let this division go to war, naturally, they would never be defeated. Because of this secret meaning that couldn't be said out loud, the 17 Armored Division didn't participate in a real battle for many years. Even when the federal military arranged for the various military regions to take turns to fight on the front line of the West Woods, they didn't have a part to play in it. Until one time, when the god of war expressed his concern about the combat strength of the old division in his hometown in Philadelphia. Then, like a little wife, his disciples took some combat personnel below platoon level from the 17th Armored Division and sent them to Bermuda as a show of respect to the god of war. The Ace Armored Division had become a decoration because of political needs. Based in the place for a long time, interacting with society, and being influenced by the lights, the iron-blooded troops gradually became silent and mediocre in the most prosperous area of the Federation. Just like the number of their garrison, they became a little more like 83-84. Although there are a lot of mountains in the military, places like the 1st Military Region are all silent places for the senior generals because the 1st Military Region is always shrouded in the glory of the god of war. When Zhou Yu mentioned that name, his expression became a little serious. It seemed that if he didn't do so, he couldn't express the respect a professional soldier had for the god of war. I heard that the Li family has some influence in the 1st Military Region. After all, they are a family with a long history, and they have been sparing no effort to sponsor the living area of the military region. It seems like they don't care about the cost and just want to get some benefits. But you don't have to worry about anything. After all, the Li family is not the Zhong family. No matter how big their influence on the military is, it's limited. This was already something that happened a few days later. Su Lu was asking Zhou Yu about the complicated factions in the military. There was no less gossip and secret information in the military than in society. Zhou Yu, who was respected by his classmates and loved by his teachers in the 1st Military Academy, had a very clear understanding of the factions in the military. His fingers left the workbench, and he rubbed his temples tiredly. He leaned back in his chair and listened to Zhou Yu's explanation. However, his eyes drifted to the corner of the warehouse. In the past few days, he had already noticed that the major called Lan Xiaolong should know by Yulon, because he forgot that Secretary Bai had once mentioned that he was from the 17th Armored Division. He didn't quite understand. In that corner, Major Lan Xiaolong was squatting on the ground and smoking. He was whispering something to Bai Yulon beside him. Bai Yulon still had a calm and gentle appearance. She crossed her arms, leaned against the wall, and lowered her head slightly. After a long time, she would reply softly, "That matter has already faded. Do you want me to go talk to the division commander and transfer you back from Whitewater?" Lan Xiaolong squatted on the ground and said, "The money in the military will definitely not be as much as you are now, but you will still have a status, and it will be much more stable." Bai Yulon looked at the tips of her shining boots and said softly, "You are already a major. Should I go back and start as a soldier? I got my position as a major through flattery. Why did I rush over with 2 helicopters this time? I know that this is a relationship between the big shots in the Federation, but I still have to take the risk. Also, that vice minister might really become a major next year. Why should I be afraid of taking a risk?" Lan Xiaolong nagged, "You are much more capable than me. When I was a company commander in the recruit camp, you could eat me alive. Go back to the 17th Armored Division and work hard for 2 years. Then the division commander will transfer you to his side and train you. Being a major is nothing." Unit 83-84. Bai Yulon softly repeated the unit number of her old unit. She laughed at herself and said softly, "I am not from the 17th Armored Division anymore. Life in Hong Kong is too easy. You are invited to those clubs every day. I'm not used to this kind of life. I also like to enjoy myself, but I don't want to do this kind of thing in uniform. I wear plain clothes every time I go there," Lan Xiaolong said angrily. Bai Yulon lowered her head, smiled, and said, "But I still don't have the face to go back. The Department of National Defense only let my division go after the war god gave the order. I went with the first batch, but I was the only one who came back alive. I made the 17th Division lose all its face. From then on, the military never even mentioned the matter of taking turns to battle. From his point of view, I also made the war god lose face once. Don't talk nonsense. The war god is fishing in Philadelphia. How would he know a small fish like you?" Lan Xiaolong scolded in a low voice. "You are just too unlucky. The Department of National Defense sent us to the edge of Bermuda for safety reasons. We thought that nothing would happen, so we were demoted to one of your classes. Who would have thought that we would meet the Empire's Special Bastard Battalion on that godforsaken mining planet? A class against a battalion. Even if the Empire's mech pilots are really bastards, the only outcome would be complete annihilation. It's already very impressive of you to be able to escape and come back. Otherwise, with the teacher's temper, he would have executed you long ago. Why would he speak for you in the military court? Hearing the war god's name repeatedly, Bai Yulan lowered her eyes. She naturally thought of the time when she first joined the army. She was still a teenager. Her quiet and clever personality was noticed by the war god, so she was transferred to the war god's side as a messenger. After that, she made a name for herself in the 17th Armored Division. But she raised her head and looked at Su Lu, who was silently working at the workbench. She said softly, "I still can't go back. My life is not my own now." Lan Xiaolong followed her gaze and knew what Bai Yulan was talking about. He couldn't help but frown. He was now in charge of protecting that ordinary-looking technical supervisor. He really couldn't see anything special about that person. He also couldn't understand why Bai Yulan was always by that person's side. "I sold my life to him for 20 million, Bai Yulan said with a smile. Lan Xiaolong was stunned. Then he cursed under his breath. However, this soldier found that Bai Yulan seemed to be more talkative and more cheerful than a few years ago. He couldn't help but think, could it be because of that young man? Thinking of this, his impression of Su Lu improved a lot. Just as the engineering department was abnormally busy, and Bai Yulan and Lan Xiaolong were catching up with each other, Manager Jose hurriedly walked into this spacious underground warehouse. His footsteps were heavy, and the expression on his face was even heavier. "Watch the news," he said to Su Lu. There was a trace of worry in his eyes. Su Lu was slightly stunned. He could vaguely guess what had happened. The workbench connected to the engineering department's network couldn't go online. He took out his phone and switched to the Federation's news channel. He saw the male anchor on the screen saying in an excited tone, regarding the birth of this revolutionary mecha, how significant its military significance to the Federation, we would like to ask Professor Zhang of the Institute of Mechanical Engineering at the Academy of Sciences. Su Lu immediately logged onto the real-time news platform of the online newspaper. He saw a very eye-catching headline appear on the front page of the Capital Special District Daily. The Federal Academy of Science officially announces that the new generation of twin-engine MX mecha has been successfully developed. Chapter 239. The atmosphere in the underground storeroom suddenly became stifling. Bai Yulan walked behind Su Lu and lowered her head to look at the contents of the news. Zhou Yu's brows also furrowed. Jose sighed and brought up the news screen. Su Li's gaze moved away from the phone and landed on the news screen again. His eyes narrowed, and he remained silent. Everyone watched the news screen in silence. The scrolling news of the Federation was currently replaying the news conference held by the Federal Academy of Science today. In front of the dark blue background of the stage, the leader of the Federation's academic community, Dean Lin, was currently waving his arms and vigorously explaining something. Following his explanation, the 3D light screen behind him began to change. A light purple mecha gradually condensed within the light, revealing its intimidating and elegant figure. The 3D light screen changed again, and the new light purple mecha broke down into countless parts, floating in the air above the hall, revealing its advanced design concepts. In particular, the streamlined twin engines floating in the middle attracted everyone's attention. Countless cameras in the press conference were focused on the stage. The reporters were so shocked that they couldn't ask any questions. They all vaguely knew that the Federation was researching this revolutionary new mecha, but they didn't know that the Academy of Science had actually quietly succeeded in developing it. They knew better than the average citizen what kind of glory this new dual-engine mecha would bring to the Federation. This is a new era, an era that belongs to MX. Dean Lin placed both hands on the stage and used an extremely dignified gaze to calmly scan the surroundings as he spoke slowly. As his voice fell, the parts of the new mecha scattered around the 3D light screen began to gather towards the center. Accompanied by the beautiful sound of metal assembling, the new light purple MX was reassembled, emitting a faint glow. At the same time, the blue background suddenly turned into a soft existence like flowing water, pouring down like mercury. A realistic purple, streamlined MX mecha appeared in front of everyone's eyes, gradually merging with the mecha in the three-dimensional light beam image. Then, the light beam dissipated, leaving behind the new mecha that was 7 meters tall, looking coldly and proudly at everyone at the press conference. The rolling news had ended, and the warehouse of the Shell Engineering Department was still silent. A depressing atmosphere hung over everyone's head. Supervisor Jose's face was pale, and Su Lu lowered his head. Zhou Yu clenched his fists tightly. Secretary Bai tilted her head to look at him. Only Major Lan Xiaolong did not understand why these people seemed so dejected. The white MX mech that was fixed to the wall of the quarantine zone had yet to be assembled. Its 3 thick and heavy mechanical arms were slowly adjusting. The body of the white mech was slightly tilted to one side, as if it was watching the news in a daze. Even it did not understand why that purple goblin on the screen had been born before it. No one knew better than the people present what the Federal Academy of Sciences announcement of the successful development of the MX mech represented. This meant that the Shell Motor Company's 10 years of hard work had all become a wedding dress for the Federal Academy of Science. This meant that the hard work of countless engineers had all been for naught. For Su Lu, this meant even more. For example, Professor Shun, the presidential election, shameless people. Bai Yulan, who was standing behind him, looked at his dejected back with a complicated expression. Suddenly, she whispered a few words to Zhou Yu. Zhou Yu shook his head. The information of the engineering department had been leaked. This had already been determined after the arrest of the board of directors. However, the most suspicious person, Supervisor Hao, had already been transferred away before the incident. From a certain perspective, this senior supervisor's actions were equivalent to betraying the Tai family and also betraying the Nutshell Engineering Department. However, this senior supervisor also had his own background. If this was really his doing, then he had now climbed up another big tree. The Federation was a place where rules were followed. The Tai family could not just drag out that supervisor and kill him. There were also no leads on the spaceship that the gunman had escaped from. Therefore, the crux of the matter now was the speed of the development of the MX mech. The Nutshell Engineering Department and Su Lu had allowed for failure, but the Academy of Science had rushed to announce the success first. Su Lu thought of the pressure deputy minister Zhou had displayed on the phone and those words he had said. He knew that he could not lose. He lowered his head and rubbed his disheveled hair. Both his feet were on the chair, but he did not express any opinion. At the same time, in the Nutshell Engineering Department, not far from this backup storage, the atmosphere had also become extremely strange. More than 200 of the company's top engineers were silently looking at the large holographic screen on the ceiling. They were looking at the scene of the Federal Academy of Sciences press conference. A feeling of disappointment and defeat pervaded the air. A very long time passed, but still no one spoke. The work that had been busy for many days also came to a temporary halt. Only a female engineer wearing cute round glasses stood up with curiosity. She stared at the beautiful yet murderous light purple mecha on the news screen. She compared it with the blueprint of the MX mecha on her workbench and found some differences. From these differences, she felt that there was something strange. Supervisor Jose knew very well that the reason Su Lu was willing to cooperate with the engineering department was because this young man had a certain stubbornness. He did not want Professor Shin's research results to be maliciously stolen by those academic bureaucrats. He also knew how much effort Su Lu had put in for this new mecha. Many sleepless days and nights had all been spent on this matter. Looking at that somewhat dejected back, he could not help but be a little worried. Would this young prodigy find it difficult to accept this result? However, right now, his mood was also unusually cold. Even if he wanted to comfort the other, he could not find any words. Just as everyone thought that Su Lu was about to break down, he slowly raised his head and turned to look at the crowd with a smile. It was not a bitter smile, but rather a smile like the radiant sun. His eyes were narrowed like two beautiful moons in the night sky, and his pearly white teeth were exposed outside his lips, as clean as the snow in Lin Hai. What are you all standing around for? The Federal Academy of Science is a top academic institution. Do you all think that because their technical reserves are weaker than ours, they should naturally fall behind us? Sulu stood up, stretched, and said with a smile, "They've already announced success, so we can't just stand around. We need to hurry up and finish what we have on hand." This overly normal reaction made everyone feel that Su Lu had become somewhat abnormal under this kind of shock. Manager Jose laughed bitterly and said in a hoarse voice, "You also know that their level is higher. They've gotten ahead of us, so what we're doing is already meaningless. You should know that there can only be one standard for the new generation of mecha." In that instant, when he had lowered his head, Su Lu had thought of many things. He had always felt that something was not right about this matter. He had a mature design plan personally guided by Professor Shun, and he himself had long since stopped deliberately slowing down the engineering department's research speed. Even if the data was leaked, the Academy of Science could not possibly be faster than the engineering department. On that rainy night, the other party's last attempt to stop the development of the Nutshell engineering department had failed. Furthermore, if Manager Hao had really leaked part of the engineering department's progress and data, the Academy of Science would definitely feel unprecedented pressure. Pressure could sometimes be motivation, but it could also make the person in charge feel anxious and flustered, just like Manager Jose was right now. Su Lu was increasingly certain that the Federal Academy of Science must not have completed sufficient internal testing. As such, the possibility of the other party discovering that he had tampered with the core data was even lower. Thus, he was not flustered. In fact, he was even somewhat glad about the events of that rainy night and Manager Hao's leak. If not for that, he really did not have the confidence that he would be able to use those fake data to fool the other party. This is a one-sided press conference by the Academy of Science. The Federation government might not even know about it. Perhaps that Dean Lin wants to create an established fact, but the problem is that we're almost there too. How could the government not consider our side? He smiled and said to everyone, "This press conference was very well done, but I keep having this feeling that the bigger their momentum now, the more embarrassing it will be in the future." No one understood this sentence, but looking at Su Li's smiling face, for some reason, they suddenly felt a little more confident. In the small conference room on the top floor of the Ministry of National Defense building in the capital Special Administrative Region, a voice rang out. The owner of the voice was President Sieg's scientific advisor. He looked at the big shots around the round table, frowned, and said, "What exactly is the Academy of Science doing? Even Mr. President does not know about this matter, and they just held a press conference. If in the future the experiment fails again like last autumn, who will explain it to the people of the Federation? How will the Empire view us?" This scientific advisor had a good relationship with Zhou. They had once attended Professor Shen's funeral together. For him to say something like this now naturally represented the attitude of a certain side. However, sitting in the very middle of the room, the National Security Advisor said, disapprovingly, "Since the Academy of Science dare to hold a press conference, they naturally have confidence. As for the testing aspect, with the lesson of the Nutshell incident, they will definitely be much more careful." Zhou Yingxing sat quietly in a corner of the round table. Such a meeting of the highest level of the Federation was usually held in the president's official residence. But today, because of the matter of the new MX Mecha, it had been moved to the Ministry of National Defense. As the Deputy Minister of National Defense, he was not considered a key figure in such an occasion. In the past, he had rarely spoken, but today, for some reason, he looked at the document in his hands and reminded everyone in a low voice, "The engineering department's research is also nearing completion." The National Security Advisor rudely interrupted him and said sharply, "How much of the Federation's funds has the engineering department wasted in these past 10 years? In the end, All they made last year was a piece of trash that could explode. So what if their research is successful this time? Could it be that the Federation's new generation of mecha coexists with two standards? Then in the future, which standard will be used to equip the troops? At this time, President Sieg was still inspecting South Kazhou. The person with the highest status in this meeting was naturally the National Security Advisor. This important figure's clear stance and faint dissatisfaction in his words made all the officials in the meeting think that Zhou Yingxing would be as silent as before. However, right at this time, the usually low-key deputy minister, Zhou, took off his glasses and threw them onto the table. Meeting the gaze of the National Security Advisor, he said coldly, "Of course, we'll use whichever standard is better." Chapter 240. The glasses fell on the smooth table and made a soft sound. It was a little harsh. Zhou Yingxing's cold retort at this time made everyone feel even more surprised. The most powerful political figures in the Federation were sitting in the small conference room, so naturally, they would not show this kind of surprise on their faces. They continued to look at the documents with their heads down as before, drinking tea as if they had not heard anything. However, they were all shocked and confused. They did not understand why Zhou Yingxing would jump out of his silence and confront the National Security Advisor directly. The National Security Advisor's expression was somewhat ugly. After a moment, he said calmly, "So, we have to wait for Nutshell? The question is, how long do you have to wait? How long does the Federation have to wait? 3 months? Half a year? We can wait, but will those ambitious people in the Empire wait?" Everyone here should be aware that the Empire's new mecha had already been in development since 3 years ago. Although we still don't know how far they have progressed, we have to make our own preparations. If the MX is equipped to the front lines a day earlier, the Federation's brave soldiers may have one less sacrifice. I disagree with Deputy Minister Zhou's opinion. We shouldn't have to wait for too long. Zhou Yingxing calmly looked at the documents in front of him and said, "But if we don't wait and unilaterally adopt the new mecha standards of the Academy of Science, how will we appease Nutshell? As far as I know, there are hundreds of engineers and tens of thousands of workers in the engineering department who have put in years of hard work for this mecha. How long is not too long?" The National Security Advisor looked coldly at Zhou Yingxing and said, "As the President's National Security Advisor, I cannot disregard the safety of the Federation just to appease the employees of one company." The atmosphere in the conference room had long become somewhat tense. It was not common to see the Deputy Minister of Defense face to face with the National Security Advisor, so most people chose to remain silent. Even the scientific advisor, who was secretly on Zhou Yingxing's side, could not confirm how long Nutshell would take, so it was not convenient for him to offer his support. "I think the Nutshell should stop for now." Mr. Security Consultant looked into Zhou Yingxing's eyes and said firmly. At this moment, an official who had been sitting at the corner of the round table suddenly smiled at the crowd and said, "I think we can wait for 2 more days." The people in the meeting room naturally knew that this young official was the Deputy Director of the Office of the President's Residence, Boog. As the Deputy Director of the Office of the President's Residence, his level of authority was not high, but because of his relationship with the President, he was able to attend the meeting. Could it be that he was speaking on behalf of the President? In a moment of doubt and silence, Deputy Director Boog looked at the security consultant and said politely, "The key is time. It's not appropriate to wait too long." He then turned to Zhou Yingxing and asked calmly, "The Department of National Defense should be monitoring the progress of the Shell Engineering Department. Can you give me a specific time?" After a moment of silence, Zhou Yingxing said 1 week. A joint meeting that appeared to be tit for tat on the surface, but which was surging in the dark, thus ended. The Federation government still had not made any specific follow-up measures in response to the explosive news from the Academy of Science. Just outside the meeting room, the security consultant dialed the President's top-secret phone number. As he silently cursed this useless idiot far away in South Dakota, his facial expression and tone simultaneously changed. Khufu. The security consultant had an extremely close relationship with President Sieg, so he directly called out the president's name. Moreover, there was a trace of friendly concern in his warm tone. Regarding the matter of a new Mecca, what exactly do you think? President Sieg's angry voice came from the other end of the phone. The Academy of Science actually released the news without informing the government. Does that Lin fellow still have any respect for me, the president? The security consultant softly comforted him and said a few words on behalf of the Federal Academy of Science. Only then did the president's anger dissipate slightly. After hanging up the phone, he touched his silver hair and could not help but shake his head. He thought to himself that this friend and student of his was really an idiot. If he had not taken care of many things for him these past few years, he was afraid that he really would have become the most laughable president in the history of the Federation. After Zhou Yingxing left the meeting room, he directly went to his office. Secretary Jiao, who had been following behind him, quickly dialed the number of the Shell Engineering Department in Hong Kong and found Su Luo. "You only have 1 week," Li Yao said. Secretary Jiao thought of the tired state of the president and said in a more serious tone, "The minister has already done his best." In a manor on the outskirts of the capital of Nank State, Special Task Force agents dressed in dark suits were vigilantly watching everything that was happening outside the manor. In a room on one side of the manor, a device specifically used to monitor the electrical current noise caused by the heating of large-scale equipment was constantly working. Ever since the assassination attempt at the Linhai State Gymnasium, the big shots of the Federation realized that there were actually people in this world who were crazy enough to use military mechas to carry out assassinations. This manor was the summer retreat of the president of the Federation, so in terms of security and defense, they were naturally very cautious. Beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the manor, President Sieg was looking at the scenery outside with a gloomy face. There was no trace of the anger that he had shown in the previous phone call. Some people are really messing around. The Federal Academy of Science is in a mess, and Senil is also in a mess now. The highest leader of the Federation was known for his 2 opposite personalities, which were cowardice and anger. He had never been highly regarded in the political world, and his popularity was also very low. However, for some reason, he had already been re-elected once. The director of the office stood silently behind the president with the phone in his hand. Senil was the national security advisor, the president's teacher in school, a friend, and an important figure in the government. There is no doubt that President Sieg's words clearly expressed his dissatisfaction with this person. There's still a few months before my term ends, but some people are already in a hurry to find their next job. President Sieg's lips curled into a mocking smile as he said, when Senator Pabre was still a lawyer, he had already embarrassed Senil several times. His company was awarded a large sum of money. No wonder he is so nervous this time. The director of the office stood behind the president and said, "There is still a week for the Shell." "A week? That should be enough to satisfy that, madam." President Sieg lit a thick stick of tobacco and said vaguely, "I don't care who wins or loses. As long as it's beneficial to the Federation, it's fine. Internal conflicts can't mess up external affairs. I've been resting for the Federation for 10 years just to prepare for the upcoming invasion of the Empire." "No." The president waved the tobacco in his hand. "My successor should have the courage to attack the Empire." The entire Federation was passionately discussing the new generation of the MX Mecha in the past few days. There were continuous in-depth reports on the TV and newspapers. The researchers of the Federal Academy of Science suddenly became the most popular interview guests. For the sake of confidentiality, they naturally wouldn't discuss the specific technical parameters and development process of the light purple MX Mecha. However, the possible effects of the dual engines have been thoroughly analyzed. In addition to the TV and newspapers, the various forums and microblogs on the internet also played an important role in this mecha craze. Countless military enthusiasts of the Federation spared no effort in analyzing the combat performance of the MX Mecha through the limited video data available. Countless people fantasized about the brave soldiers of the Federation operating the powerful mecha and defeating the barbaric invaders in the war against the Empire's invasion. In the blink of an eye, The patriotic passion of the Federation was fully aroused. Everyone was discussing the mecha, the dual engines, the electron jet, and other technical terms that they didn't understand before. Following this discussion, the Federal Academy of Sciences' position in the hearts of the people became more and more noble. Dean Lin, who led the development of the new mecha, also received unprecedented respect. In this atmosphere, even the most important autumn offensive of the presidential election was about to be forgotten by the media and the people. Only a very small number of people knew that the public support that the Federal Academy of Science gained from this incident was about to be converted into political support for the election of Ross Medellin's presidential candidate partner. On the surface, the underground nutshell engineering department of the Harbor City Industrial Park wasn't affected by this craze. All the engineers continued to follow the established schedule, silently and diligently carrying out their work. Life had to go on, although that faint sense of disappointment still shrouded the space. As long as the Federation government didn't announce it, they would fight for it. The MX mecha parked in the underground warehouse was nearing completion. In the isolation room, on the assembly line, countless components were being assembled. The wings were attached, and the firepower system was also beginning to be installed one by one on the body of the mecha under the fine control of the mechanical arms. After the second coating, the surface of the MX mecha glowed with a silvery white light. Coupled with the wings on the back, it looked exceptionally beautiful. Beautiful, but it could be forgotten by the entire Federation. Sulu rubbed his dry eyes and licked his dry lips. He looked at the MX mecha in front of him with more confidence than anyone else. It was at this moment that two words suddenly appeared on the gray holographic screen of the workbench. Hello. Sulu was slightly taken aback. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the two small words. Shock grew in his heart. This was the workbench that he had spent a great deal of effort to set up. It could block all wireless communications. How could someone hack into the workbench and send him a signal? Could it be that existence he didn't want to think of again and wanted to chat with him out of boredom? The intruder didn't frighten Su Lu for too long. A second line of small words immediately appeared. I've done a comparison of the components. I feel that some of the designs of the mecha from the Academy of Science are better. Would you like to take a look? Chapter 241. After seeing this sentence, Su Li's nervousness was mostly relieved. The terrifying existence who had forced its way into his dreams the last few times had appeared to be omnipotent despite not knowing where it had come from. Although he had no clues to grasp, using his engineer's logic, he had already deduced that if the other party was not the Bureau of Proclamation, then it was the Federal Central Computer under the Bureau of Proclamation. This was a possibility that terrified him so much that he did not want to think about it. Earlier, when he had seen the sudden appearance of that line of words on the workbench, he had immediately thought of that great existence who called himself the Old Thing. However, he then remembered that the other party could directly invade his brain to talk to him. So why would they use this method? Moreover, although that existence had also very politely addressed him with the word sir in those dark dream characters, it was ultimately not as mundane and real as the words on the workbench right now. Sulu thought for a moment and decided not to tell Supervisor Jose about someone invading his workbench. He quickly analyzed the situation in his mind. The workbench was currently connected to the engineering department's internal network, and the underground department of the engineering department was not completely cut off from the Federation's network. The person who had invaded his workbench must be within the engineering department, and judging from the other party's words, it did not seem like they had any ill intentions. He typed into the GE conversation software window, "Who are you?" The other side of the conversation window was silent for a while, and then a line of words appeared, "Please do not panic. I am a technician from the engineering department. Because I could not find a way to contact you, I invaded your workbench." Sulu scratched his head, more or less understanding the other's meaning. Although many people in the upper echelons of the Federation knew that he had helped the Nutshell Engineering Department, at the other levels, his participation in the development of the MX Mecha was still top secret. Supervisor Jose had tight control over the engineering department. So even though he had been working with those mature and experienced engineers of the engineering department for so many days, The people in the engineering department still did not know who was helping them, even though the straight line distance between them was less than 1 kilometer. It looked like that technician on the other side had really discovered some problem and was in a hurry to contact the mysterious support team in the backup storeroom. He did not have the authority to go through the proper channels, so he had used this method. However, Sulu was a little wary of the other party's technical means. They were actually able to infiltrate his workstation through the engineering department's intranet. It's normal if the Academy of Sciences design is better than ours. He typed on the screen. Is there a problem? The other side sent over a compressed image package, which was then displayed on the holographic screen. After the press conference at the Academy of Science, I took a screenshot of some comparative drawings. There are some problems in them, so I'll send them to you for a look. Sulu opened the compressed package, propped up his head, and began to carefully read the very clearly marked blueprints. At first, he didn't know what the other party meant, but after carefully reading the notes and side notes, he roughly understood that the other party should have discovered some problems with the Federal Academy of Sciences MX design. The main difference between the two design ideas was in the angle of fine adjustment of the electron jets behind the twin engines. That engineer had only calculated this angle by comparing the blueprints and calculating the ratio of the armor behind the waist of the Federal Academy of Sciences MX mecha. This angle was not some particularly important data. The problem was that this engineer who had infiltrated Su Li's workstation was able to calculate the difference in the TT31 formula in the quantum measurable dynamic core data and function model used by the Federal Academy of Science and the engineering department, just based on this difference in angle. Sula narrowed his eyes as he looked at these calculation results, but the shock in the depths of his heart could not be any greater. The data that the Federal Academy of Science had snatched from his hands had originally been tampered with through that great being. Therefore, the other party's modification design for the electron jets being somewhat different was something that he had long expected. What shocked him was that this unknown engineer was actually able to calculate so many things just from the appearance of the purple MX at the press conference. This should be what a true genius is, right? He stared blankly at the numbers on the holographic screen. Very complicated emotions welled up in his heart. On one hand, he admired that engineer, but on the other hand, he was worried that this engineer's findings would interfere with his plans. The streamlined silver-white MX mecha was not far in front of him. Those complicated power devices and firepower systems had long been installed. The finely designed attachment wings had also begun to calibrate their interfaces. The engineering department's small production line was currently creating interfaces that could be quickly replaced. Sulu scratched his head and raised his head. Looking at the scene in front of him, he thought of that genius engineer and remained silent. The entire Shell engineering department treated the data and function model he had brought as the most important thing. But Sulu understood that this was only because the Federation's academic community had not done much research in the field of quantum dynamic measurability these past few years. The Shell Motor Corporation engineering department had worked hard for this silver-white MX mecha for more than 10 years. The majority of the work had already been completed. It was only because of the failure of the experiment last autumn that they needed his help. Because the engine inlet had to be modified, Sulu had participated in the final assembly design this time. However, the ones who had truly solved the problem were still those outstanding and nameless engineers in the engineering department. Only the engineers of the Shell engineering department were the true contributors to the creation of the MX mecha. They were amazing giants. Sulu knew that he was only standing on the shoulders of a giant, helping him pick out a wooden spike that had pierced his earlobe to cause him pain. Your judgment is correct. The function models used by our two sides are different. Sulu was silent for a long time before he typed. But please keep this matter confidential. Confidential? The reply from the other side was very quick. Is this a disciplinary requirement? If so, of course it will be kept confidential. However, I still feel that the design from the Academy of Science seems to be better. Sula knew how to explain this problem. He typed, "Can I meet you?" He forcefully changed the topic. He had originally thought that the other side would maintain a sense of mystery, or that they would not be willing to reveal their identity at all. Unexpectedly, the reply from the other side was even faster, and there were many emojis that represented excitement in the characters. Of course you can. I've always been very curious about where this mysterious team of yours came from. I've asked the people in the Research Institute to help me find out. Recently, no one from the Research Institute has been transferred over by the engineering department. These ordinary words hid excitement and desire. Sulu had no idea that he had long become a great mystery in the engineering department, so he could not understand the other's excitement. Open the video on your side and go through the security clearance, the engineer typed. Sula did as he was told and opened the clearance. Then he saw the color block in the dialog box begin to change. It went from blurry to clear, and then the scene on the other side appeared. He rubbed his eyes. He did not understand why the first thing he saw in the video was an extremely elastic pillow pressed together by someone's hand, revealing a deep cleavage. The deep cleavage moved and moved back. Gradually, the whole image came into view. Suli's face turned slightly red. Only then did he realize that the first thing he saw was actually a girl's extremely full chest. The female engineer on the other side of the video was not very old. Her delicate face was filled with a pair of curious eyes, and a pair of large glasses made her eyes look even cuter. Her black hair was haphazardly tied up with a pin, and she wore a white work uniform. The uniform was not fastened, revealing a light yellow tight vest underneath. When Sulu saw the pair of glasses, he was stunned. When he saw the other person's face, he sighed softly in his heart. Then his eyes were immediately attracted by the tight curves of the light yellow vest. Previously, he was a little surprised by the female engineer's voluptuous figure. Now, when he saw the other person's outfit and age, he felt that this combination was too abrupt. He had only opened the security clearance that allowed the video signal to enter, so the other person should not be able to see his current actions. However, Sulu still felt a little embarrassed. He tilted his head, but less than a second later, he could not help but stare curiously at the girl's chest in the video. Although Uncle Phone did not succeed in bringing him into the world of cosmetics, he had cultivated a habit of looking at beautiful women on the street. Not to mention, at this time, in the heavily guarded underground of the engineering department, he could see the most attractive part of a girl's body at such a close distance. After all, he was still a young man, and it was difficult for him to resist this temptation. "My name is Shang Chiu." The girl smiled and introduced herself. "I'm a technician from the engineering department. Mr. Jose has been hiding you guys very well. I'm really curious about who can come up with these structural blueprints. You have to know that since last autumn, I have been working on the electronic jet modification work, but my progress is much slower than yours." Sula looked at this female engineer named Shang Chiu, scratched his head, and turned his head around uneasily. He thought about how he thought this person was a genius, and in his heart he guessed that technical geniuses were probably idiots in life. Otherwise, they would definitely notice how her voluptuous breasts would cause trouble to the person on the other side of the video. He thought about it and sent a message to the other side, saying, "Engineer Shang, can you adjust the video a bit?" As soon as he sent this message, he heard an angry objection from beside him. Major Lon Xiaolong stared at Su Lu very gloomily and said, "Hypocrite, such big breasts, and she's an engineer with glasses. How can you not take a second look?" Su Lu was stunned. Only then did he notice that those people had already walked up to his side at some point. That Major Lon Xiaolong, who was in charge of protecting him, was staring fixedly at the screen, while Bai Yulan was standing to one side with her hands folded in her sleeves. Meanwhile, Zhou Yu was looking at him with a strange expression. "There's no need to keep it a secret anymore. The engineering department has been guessing at your identity for a long time now, even going so far as to make a few calls." Supervisor Jose came to the side of the group and said with a smile, "The Shang Chiu who invaded your workbench is the most famous technical fanatic in the engineering department, and also my most capable subordinate. She is the most eccentric technician in the engineering department, and also the most impressive. Generally speaking, we all think of her as a freak." The final design of the MX Mecha was largely due to her contributions. Zhou Yu shrugged and added, Of course, now I feel that you're a bit more of a freak than her. Major Lan Xiaolong reluctantly watched the video move from the voluptuous breast to Shang Qiu's face and said seriously, I only know that this is definitely the technician with the biggest breasts in the nutshell engineering department. Just as Zhou Yu had said, Su Lu had joined the research and development team of the nutshell engineering department, restarting the final repair work of the MX Mecha. These past few days, the two sides had not met each other, but they had worked together with great rapport. This caused the hundreds of technicians in the engineering department to develop a trace of admiration and endless curiosity towards the technical support team in the backup storeroom. They did not know when such an outstanding technical team had appeared in the Federation. However, since they were engaged in a confidential business, naturally not many people would ask about it. Even if they did, with Supervisor Jose and Zhou Yu's protective nature, they would not tell them. Therefore, speculations about this mysterious technical team gradually spread. Many people believed that it was those old professors from the Research Institute. Some believed that it was the Federal Academy of Science that had come to provide support for the overall benefit of the Federation. And some believed that it was the board of directors that had invited those researchers from Guzhong Corporation. After all, Guzhong Corporation's multi-engine technology was ahead of the rest of the Federation. Many people knew about the conflict that had occurred on that rainy night, but that incident only added to the mystery surrounding those people in the backup storeroom. A technical team that was qualified to be carefully protected by the active Federal Army. Just by imagining it, one would feel that it was somewhat unfathomable. Shang Qiu was a female doctorate graduate from the Capital University. Just like Su Lu, she was also an abnormal human who did not have a background in the mechanical department of the top 3 schools, but had successfully entered the nutshell. However, her abnormality was mainly reflected in her superhuman IQ, as well as her fanatical research into mechanical technology. She did not believe that this mysterious team had come from the Research Institute, the Academy of Science, or the Guzhong Corporation. This was because any design would always have its own theoretical support and style. However, the modification of the electron jets by this mysterious team was completely based on the research of quantum measurable dynamics. This was especially true for the final few sets of structural design concepts, which were even more difficult to understand. They were very different from the usual conventions of the Federation's academic community. Shang Qiu was not a technical member of the Academy, so she very keenly deduced that this mysterious technical support team, or at least the spiritual core of the team, should have come from an unorthodox background just like herself. In these past few days of work, Shang Qiu had been looking at the data, instructions, and blueprints sent over from the backup storeroom. She had developed a strong sense of admiration and recognition towards the technical prowess of this mysterious team from the depths of her heart. She was a technical fanatic, so when she found that someone had gone further than her and was at a higher level, she could not help but develop the desire to learn from them. Unfortunately, the discipline of the engineering department was strict. As the technical supervisor, she had to set an example. Thus, these past few days, she could only forcefully suppress the curiosity in her heart and wait for the day when the final results would be announced. She could only watch as the Federal Academy of Science rushed to announce the new mecha. After using her computer to perform countless calculations and comparisons of blueprints, she confirmed that there was something strange about this matter. No matter what kind of woman she was, she would always need a reason to do something. Shang Qiu found a very good reason, and then added on the excuse that she was temporarily unable to contact Supervisor Jose and that she was pressed for time. Thus, she brazenly hacked into the workbench in the backup storeroom and began her conversation with those mysterious people. This was the first conversation between Shang Qiu and Su Lu. Neither of the two parties involved in the conversation would have expected that from then on, this conversation about technology would run through the rest of their lives. And from a certain perspective, it would also change their lives and affect the lives of many others. If it's not a breach of confidentiality regulations, can you reveal a little? What's your name? How many people are in your team? And where are you from? Who is your technical supervisor? Shang Qiu typed rapidly on the keyboard as she asked curiously, completely oblivious to the fact that as she moved, her bulging breasts, tightly wrapped by her yellow singlet, appeared even more alluring. The other side of the conversation box was silent for a moment before responding, "My name is Su Lo. I'm from Whitewater Company. Our team, I don't know how many people there are. If we include Zhou Yu and Mr. Jose, then it's 4 people. We don't have a technical supervisor, but if you want to discuss the previous question, you can talk to me directly." Shang Qiu looked at these words and couldn't help but be stunned. She didn't believe the other side's answer. How could those low-level technical supervisors in Whitewater Security Company be able to create these things? And according to what the other side said, in fact, this team only had 2 people. She rubbed her somewhat tight forehead and pushed up the glasses that were about to fall down the bridge of her nose. Her action was particularly cute, and she asked seriously, "Su Gong, is what you said true? Then you really are a peerless genius." The people in the conversation didn't see that this female engineer had already begun to quietly operate her computer. She entered a few commands and hacked into the other side's workbench again. Without alerting any of the defense systems, she activated the other side's video capture device. Sulu was a little embarrassed. He thought to himself that this female engineer was able to hack into the workbench and discover the problem in such a short time. In fact, he was only able to do all this by relying on Professor Shin's legacy and the structural blueprint in the Dark Dream. In a sense, he was just a cheater. Receiving such praise really made him feel a little embarrassed. At this time, Shang Qiu had quietly remotely activated the video capture system of the workbench in the backup warehouse. Then, her expression suddenly became strange. This was because she confirmed that this guy named Su Lu was telling the truth. On the screen was a young face with a trace of shyness and awkwardness. And behind the young man were Manager Jose and Zhou Yu. Further to the side was a pervert in a military uniform who looked abnormally disgusting. Shang Qiu subconsciously lowered her head and glanced at her chest. Then, she looked up and said, "Are my breasts very big?" The person on the other side of the screen didn't know why she said that, nor did he know that she was monitoring him. Sulu was stunned for a moment. Of course, he wasn't stupid enough to type the words, "very big breasts." He just nodded subconsciously. Behind him, Major Lan Xiaolong was about to nod his head off. Even Manager Jose and Zhou Yu couldn't help but smile and shrug their shoulders after looking at each other. Shang Qiu smiled and typed, "Big breasts don't mean no brain. Get that stinking soldier out of here." When this sentence came out, everyone's body froze. Chapter 242. Conscience is when we are aware of the existence of the court of morality within us. No matter what method we choose to use to live in this universe, perhaps we can find a path for rats to crawl through in the radiance of the charter. Perhaps we can turn the legal provisions into those yellowed papers and scattered electronic data. But when we grow old, we will always have to look back and see the verdict of the court of morality within us. People, there has never been a truly harmonious world. There is no absolute fairness, but everyone walks the path of harmony and fairness. Perhaps some people will break the wooden stick and drive away the beast on the road, but perhaps in the next moment, that wooden stick will become a job for us to bully our companions. Deep within everyone's heart, there will be a beast. What we need to do is to throw away those wooden sticks and use a non-beastly method to deal with the disputes between us. George Carlin said that the greatest injustice in the Federation society is the unfair possession of information by different classes. This is a simple and thought-provoking judgment. People, please think about it. How much do we know about the things in the Federation? Are the things we know true? Are the things we know what some people want us to know? If there is no true sharing of information, then when we deal with the disputes between us, will we already be in a state of inequality? Will we angrily pick up the wooden stick in our hands again? People, we need change. What we need is not a change on the surface, but a change on the deepest level. From the pond of the past, there will be no fish that wants to jump out of the pond. Thinking deeper from the sharing of information, I often associate it with that ordinary building in the suburbs of the capital, that one-way road. I am thinking about how the radiance of the Charter protects the hundreds of millions of people in the Federation to live in a peaceful environment. But do we need to make some corresponding changes? Of course, this should be a matter for many years to come. People, change in the Federation is right before your eyes, and the ones who can push for this change and make this change a reality are you, and only you. The autumn of the 67th year of the constitutional calendar has already arrived, and the votes are being printed under the supervision of the election committee. Your fingers will decide everything. I'm Senator Medellin from Region S2. I have come to the pond, that is the Federation. I want to make a change, and I need you to vote for me and Governor Ross. This is a sincere and direct request. It had been a few days since Xiao Wenjing had been transferred from the second branch of the district procurator's office. He knew that it was probably because of the aftermath of the murder case at the entrance of Hushan Road. This office was located in a building next to Charter Square. This building was a foreign office of the Federal Justice Department. Until today, he only knew that this office should belong to the Investigation and Law Enforcement Department. However, he did not understand why the recent documents sent to the office seemed to be applications for the appointment of an independent prosecutor by the Federal Management Committee. There were no cases that required independent investigation in the Federation recently. Since he had nothing else to do, he picked up the newspaper in his hand and continued to flip through it, preparing to finish reading Senator Medellin's column. As an inspector of the Federation, he had seen countless dirty deals within the Federation, but he still retained his faith in the judiciary and his love for the system. He was not a person who liked to participate in politics, but he had some feelings for Senator Macklin's article. This was already the 17th article that Senator Macklin had published in the Capital Daily. Since the terrorist attack at the S2 concert in mountainous 4 states, Senator Macklin had used this method to communicate with the voters of the Federation. This former second-in-command of the anti-government army was indeed a political figure recognized by the people of the Federation as St. George's disciple. The 17 political articles included all aspects of the Federation's political and economic life. The language was simple and easy to understand. On one hand, he described the political views of Ross's presidential candidate and himself. On the other hand, he called for the entire Federation to continue on the path of reconciliation and nonviolence. Ordinary language, coupled with this senator's legendary political experience, began to reveal an extremely attractive power. When the first 16 political articles were published, the people of the Federation fought to read them. It was not convenient for the scholars and professors in the academic world to express their opinions, but it was said that they also admired Senator Macklin in private. As a Ritter-Nee, a member of the opposition, he was very clear about the shortcomings of the Federation's political scene. At the same time, he was able to use this kind of rational attitude to propose reforms. He was not blindly radical. Today was the 17th political article, and also the last one. Senator Macklin changed his usual calm and gentle tone and began to use more eye-catching words and provocative tones. With the concrete thoughts of the first 16 articles as a foundation, this last concluding speech was full of vigor and determination. It does feel a little hot-blooded. This counselor actually dares to mention the reform of the Charter Bureau. He is really bold. Xiao Wenjing put down the newspaper in his hand, crossed his legs, and began to browse the interesting articles on the internet. In the past few days, he was like the average citizen of the Federation, mainly downloading the beautiful blueprints of the MX Mecha named Purple Sea. Right at this moment, a notification flashed on the screen. He stood up, tidied up his inspector uniform, and headed upstairs to the office. After entering the office, he saw the appearance of the middle-aged inspector in front of the office. He could not help but be stunned. After a moment's hesitation, he said, "Teacher." The middle-aged inspector's eyes were sunken, his expression solemn. When he heard this form of address, he raised his head and said, "I am now an independent inspector personally appointed by the Minister of Justice." Xiao Wenjing immediately understood. There must be a big case in the Federation. Otherwise, the Minister of Justice would not have let his teacher come out of the academy to take over. He He was stunned for a moment before recalling that he had been transferred to this department. Could it be that his teacher had started taking over this case a long time ago? That was why he had been transferred here to help. But the question was, why had he not heard anything about this before? What case is it? He walked up to the independent inspector's desk. On the desk was a small sword that represented the Federation's law and justice. Do you still have confidence in the Federation's law? The middle-aged inspector raised his head and looked at his most valued student. He knew better than anyone else the embarrassing role played by the Prosecutor General's office in the murder case at Tiger Mountain Road. He also knew the student's current state of mind, so he did not answer his question. Instead, he asked such a question. Xiao Wenjing glanced at the small sword on the desk and said very seriously, "Yes. Well, I can tell you. The case that the Minister of Justice has authorized me to independently investigate is related to Senator Macklin. There are a total of 17 crimes waiting for this senator," the middle-aged inspector said expressionlessly. When Xiao Wenjing heard the name Senator Macklin, heard the 17 crimes, and then connected it to the 17 political articles, he subconsciously thought of many things. A hint of boredom and disgust flashed in his eyes. He said with a slight self-deprecating tone, "The Federation's political schemes are really endless." The middle-aged inspector was not surprised by this student's reaction. This was because when the Minister of Justice first notified him, he also had the same thoughts. Now, Senator Macklin was assisting Governor Ross in the presidential election, but at this time, the Federation government wanted to investigate him. If it was said that there was no political conspiracy involved, no one would believe it. Just finish reading these materials in my office before you express your opinion. He frowned and reprimanded. An inspector should have his own independent judgment and not be blinded by the so-called public opinion and external image. This is the first lesson I taught you. Have you forgotten? Xiao Wenjing bowed his head and admitted his mistake. He walked in front of the computer and began to seriously look at the materials that had been organized into 4 files. The more he looked, the more shocked he was. He could not believe his eyes. Senator Macklin, who was famous in the Federation for his nonviolent views, was actually the mastermind behind so many terrorist attacks. As an extremely professional inspector, Xiao Wenjing did not spend much time to determine that these materials were definitely not used by someone to frame Senator Macklin. At this time, of course, he did not know that these materials were collected by an excellent spy named Shi Qinghai, who spent countless nights to collect the information. He only subconsciously thought that if these things were verified, the entire Federation would usher in a great shock. After an unknown amount of time, Xiao Wenjing finally finished reading these shocking materials. His eyebrows gradually furrowed. The presidential candidate, after being registered by the election committee, has temporary jurisdiction. He looked at his teacher worriedly. These materials can only be used in a reasonable way, but they cannot be used to help with the prosecution. What is your judgment? The middle-aged inspector did not answer the question. Instead, he asked directly, "I think that Senator Macklin is very suspicious." Xiao Wenjing once again organized the materials in his mind and said very seriously, "Senator Macklin has jurisdiction, so the investigation can only be carried out in secret. The Ministry of Justice has already granted the authority, but now the Federation Management Committee will not approve the application to set up an independent inspector, so I'm also a temporary guy." Xiao Wenjing understood the main work that had been done in this organization a few days ago. You have the authority to mobilize the police department, the Federation administration's resources. The middle-aged inspector looked at him and said, "If there is no evidence, you have to find the evidence. Don't forget, we are the Federation, and he is only a suspect. No matter how experienced a politician is, he will never be able to hide in front of the law. Do you have this confidence?" "Yes," Xiao Wenjing replied. "Very good." The middle-aged inspector smiled and glanced at Senator Macklin's political column in a newspaper from the corner of his eyes. He said softly, "I don't know if this vice presidential candidate has a moral cord in his heart, but I want to remind him that the Federation has a real cord." Xiao Wenjing nodded, but he knew in his heart that if Senator Macklin was really elected as the Federation's vice president, With the efficiency and decentralization of the Federation Management Committee, it would definitely be impossible to pass an impeachment bill or an independent investigation bill. At least during his term, it would be difficult for the Ministry of Justice to continue this investigation, and Senator Macklin would be very safe. At this time, he suddenly realized that the vote in his hand was also very important. At the same time, on Carbine Street, with a major media gathered in the Capital Special District, an argument that was much more intense than the one in the Ministry of Justice broke out in the editor-in-chief's office inside a building. The editorial department of the Capital Daily News had this kind of drama all year round, just like the profound lunar eclipse pattern outside the newspaper office building. There was no such thing as perfect peace. I need a reason. You have to give me a reason today. I found 3 reporters and 17 paparazzi, spent 70,000 Federation coins, and finally verified a little bit of the anonymous information. It was written into a block of tofu with a few hundred words. And you actually suppressed it? And suppressed it 3 times in a row. Mr. Wood, the senior political reporter of the Capital Daily News, looked at the editor-in-chief angrily and roared, "Mr. Bob, what exactly do you want to do? Don't tell me that because you don't want to offend politicians, you have become a piece of trash who has forgotten the rules of journalism." The editor-in-chief, Bob, glanced at the closed glass door and confirmed that the conversation between him and his old partner would not be heard by anyone. He was slightly relieved. He was silent for a moment, shook his head with a bitter smile, and said, "Wood, don't forget that I'm also a reporter, and I am the chief reporter of the Capital Daily News. I know the purpose of the Daily News better than anyone else. The half-eclipsed moon outside is constantly reminding us, but you still can't publish this report. We need to find out the reason why the moon is half-eclipsed." This is a famous quote that the journalists said when they wanted to break through the government's blockade when the Federation opened up the Donglin region. Mr. Wood sat down with a sullen face and said, "You are not even afraid of the government's pressure. I don't understand. Do you want to watch a politician who deceives the world and gains fame by playing with the anti-government army and the voters of the Federation become a vice president? The problem is that your investigation has no real evidence." The editor-in-chief, Bob, frowned and said, "You know very well how much pressure the newspaper office has to bear when such a report comes out. The key problem now is that we are not facing the government, but a politician who is deeply respected by the voters of the Federation. We have to be careful in seeking confirmation. Being careful in seeking confirmation is the job of scientists. Journalists only need to report what they find objectively. As for what readers will associate and discover from these news facts, that is not a problem we should be concerned about. Would directly cut him off. Our newspaper office has always been known for being fair and objective. The editor-in-chief also began to get angry. He slammed the table and shouted, "But now you want to use this report to influence the presidential election, and it is a candidate from the opposition, without any real evidence. What will the entire Federation think of our newspaper? Will they think that you or I just published the report based on the self-awareness of a journalist? They will only think that we were pressured by certain forces in the Federation to act as the thugs of the politicians to suppress an old man who has no foundation in the Federation and who has just entered the Management Committee less than 2 years ago, who advocates nonviolence." This was a very long paragraph. After Bob finished speaking, he was also a bit out of breath. He took a sip of coffee and said in a hoarse voice, "If you can find real evidence, I will agree to your report even if I have to give up my position as editor-in-chief. But if you can't find it, I can't agree. It is precisely because our newspaper is known for being fair and objective in the Federation that the informant gave us such important information." Mr. Wood was no longer as agitated as before. He said with a trace of pain, "I understand what you mean, but we are only journalists. If even we can investigate the matter behind Senator Macklin, then what is the use of the Ministry of Justice? What is the use of the judges? We are only the explorers of the facts. Those facts are right on your table. If we can't report these, how can we face the trust of the brave informant? There are many kinds of facts. Different ways of writing will give readers different impressions after reading them." The editor-in-chief said tiredly, "I can't take this risk. If the readers of the entire Federation think that we have become thugs for the politicians, who will be responsible for the reputation of this newspaper that has lasted for thousands of years? I will try my best to be objective. You don't have to say any more. The editor-in-chief looked at his colleague who had entered the newspaper with him and said with a frown, "Don't forget, the person you are investigating is very likely to be the next vice president." According to the latest poll, the support for Ross and his partner is approaching that of Senator Pabre. And according to my sources, this afternoon, there will be a heavyweight bomb thrown at Ross and Macklin. At this time, we, a newspaper, can't expect to be able to change the attitude of the Federation voters. Reporter Wood was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he asked, "Did the board of directors give you any hints?" The Capital Daily News was funded by an institution under the Samlin United Bank. The Samlin United Bank belonged to the Lee family, one of the 7 families in the Federation. The Lee family was a strong supporter of Ross and Macklin in this presidential election. For these reporters who had been in the news industry for many years, these things were no secret. Seeing that the unfavorable report on Senator Macklin had been suppressed would naturally thought of this. The editor-in-chief, Bob, looked at him coldly. After a long time, he said, "You underestimate me." Wood was silent for a moment. He believed that the editor-in-chief was not such a person. He said, "Sorry, I'm a little emotional today. It's not that I don't want you to report, but I need an opportunity. The most famous method of a news reporter is to beat the dog that is in the water. We don't need hypocritical pity." The editor-in-chief, Bob, sighed and said softly, "Senator Macklin hasn't fallen into the water yet. It's not the right time for us to make a move." Wood understood the editor-in-chief's meaning. He sighed and said, "The problem is that the autumn election is about to begin. Where can we find the right time?" "I believe there must be one," Bob said to himself in his heart. He looked at the column of Senator Macklin's political opinion in his newspaper. Suddenly, a trace of disgust surged in his heart. He threw the newspaper into the wastepaper basket. He looked up at the respected reporter, Wood, and said calmly, "If the court of the Federation doesn't work by then, and the court of ethics in Senator Macklin's heart doesn't work, then our newspaper will have to become his court of ethics. Although this is a very inappropriate way of doing things." Chapter 243. It was not autumn between August and September, but the drizzling rain in Harbor City washed away the heat and soothed the smell of dust. Then, with the cold wind blowing from the north, the air began to cool and clean, adding a hint of autumn to it. Sulu stood on the platform of the Industrial Park building, squinting his eyes as he looked at the blurry watercolor-like scenery of the city on the other side of the drizzling autumn rain. He subconsciously raised his hand and took a puff of a 37 brand cigarette. The cigarette entered his throat and lungs. It was a little spicy, but also a little sweet, just like his mood at the moment. Yesterday afternoon, in the bustling city of Harbor City, the election of Governor Ross and Senator Medellin had carried out a huge campaign. The people who came to participate were not afraid of the cold autumn rain, and the number of people reached more than 200,000. During that campaign, Dean Lin of the Federal Academy of Science finally stood on the stage. In his decades of academic career, this was the first time he expressed his views on politics, and he called on the Federation voters to support Ross and Senator Medellin. Sulu could not remember the reason that Dean Lin of the Academy of Sciences used. It was mostly that he yearned for peace, and every contribution he made to the Federation was to resist the invasion of the Empire, to unite the people of the Federation, and that Governor Ross and Senator Medellin were presidential candidates that he believed to be trustworthy, and so on. The Federal Academy of Science, which had a high status in the hearts of the Federation citizens, expressed its views on the presidential election for the first time. Whether this was in accordance with the election laws of the Federation was not something that many people cared about, because Senator Pabre would not be able to fight a constitutional lawsuit at this time. The key was that the effect had already been seen. After the Academy of Sciences announced the successful development of the MX Mecha, its position in the hearts of the Federation citizens improved. The bias that Dean Lin announced had a huge impact on the psychology of the voters. According to the latest Federation TV poll, Ross and Senator Medellin had for the first time surpassed Senator Pabre in terms of public support. Sula narrowed his eyes at the sudden, desolate autumn scene, but he didn't feel too much sorrow in his heart. However, he was wondering why the things that Shi Qinghai had passed to Secretary Shun through him hadn't been exposed at this time of the presidential election. Could it be that Lady Tai was so confident in Pabre that she didn't want to resort to such means? In a sense, Shi Qinghai and Su Lu were just small fries. However, these two small fries were constantly trying to achieve great things. Sula didn't know if he could succeed. He only knew that if someone like Senator Macklin were to stand at the peak of the Federation's power, the Federation, which was already somewhat corrupt, would become even more unacceptable. He put the cigarette to his lips with 2 fingers and took a deep breath. He asked softly, "Is the result not out yet?" Shang Qiu was wearing a gray work uniform and standing quietly beside him. She was looking at something below the rooftop. There were still some raindrops on her huge glasses. When she heard this, she knew that the young man beside her was not as calm as he appeared to be. She lowered her head and answered, "We have done what we should do. Whether we can pass the final test or not is up to God." Since the video call that day, because there was no longer a need to keep it a secret, the engineers of the Nutshell Engineering Department knew the true identity of the mysterious technical team in the backup storage room. They were shocked that there was only one person in the team. Engineer Shang Qiu came directly to the backup storage room and started working with Su Lu. They didn't know what Su Lu said to Shang Qiu, but this genius female engineer didn't ask about the error in the core data anymore. Maybe she knew the truth, so other than the two of them, no one else knew about the secret of the new MX machine named Purple Sea from the Federal Academy of Science. They were both engineers with extraordinary talents. From the beginning, Su Lu and Shang Qiu's communication was very smooth. No matter what idea he came up with, this female engineer seemed to be able to use the current technology of the Federation to find a way to realize it. And every time Shang Qiu came up with a vague idea, Su Lu could use his knowledge, the ideas taught by the uncle, and the complicated blueprints in his mind to give her some inspiration. This kind of extremely tacit cooperation had actually started a long time ago, before the two of them had even met. Shang Qiu had always been in charge of the finalization of the MX mecha. Su Li's work in the underground of the engineering department these past few days was mainly to cooperate with this girl. However, he hadn't known about this at the start. Shang Qiu also hadn't expected that the technical support team in the backup storage room would actually be someone younger than herself. The air on the rooftop was somewhat chilly. Shang Qiu tightened the work uniform draped over her body, her arms crossed in front of her chest, which squeezed the dizzying whiteness of her breasts even more. Su Lu had long gotten used to this female engineer's figure, so he was no longer as nervous and stunned as before. After a brief pause, he passed a cigarette to her and said, "I can't be as calm as you. I'm faking it." Shang Qiu moved to his side and lit the cigarette. The reddish end of the cigarette trembled in the autumn wind. She exhaled the smoke somewhat shakily, coughed twice, and said, "After I graduated from Metropolis University, I entered the engineering department. The first and last job I took on was the MX mecha. In truth, this is the only thing I've done in my life. Today, I'll know whether this thing will succeed or not. Of course, I'm a little nervous." Su Lu glanced at her, took a deep drag on his cigarette, and extinguished it in the water stains on the railing. He said, "I'm also very nervous." The profession of an engineer was different from that of a warship commander. It was still a male-dominated world. This was determined by the difference in the thought patterns and interest of the sexes in metal and machinery. He thought to himself, Shang Qiu had been able to enter the core department to research the MX mecha as soon as she graduated from Metropolis University. Moreover, in just a few short years, she had risen from a normal technician to the present technical supervisor. Her ability had already been amply proven. The Federation government had given the Nutshell Engineering Department a week's time. Today was the last day. No matter how many ideas the hundreds of engineers in the engineering department still had to be tested, or how much finishing work they still had to do, a result had to be produced today. In fact, when Su Lu and Shang Xiu were smoking on the rooftop, it was precisely when the DoD General Assembly Base officers were coming to the engineering department to conduct a joint inspection. Success and failure would be determined in these few short hours. Just as Shang Xiu had said earlier, what they needed to do had already been done. There was no point in staying in the storeroom any longer. Thus, they simply left the storeroom and came to the rooftop to bask in the autumn rain and scenery. It was as if this was the only way to leave that tense and stifling atmosphere. Speaking of which, it was very strange. The engineering department's MX Mecha was currently undergoing inspection, but the two most important and crucial engineers were hiding outside, not thinking or daring to care about those things at all. Almost at the same time, Mr. Jose's voice rang out from Su Lu and Shang Qiu's communicators. The two of them exchanged a look, and from the other's eyes, they both found that Mr. Jose's tone did not reveal anything. This pair of young geniuses very tacitly wiped away the rainwater on their foreheads and walked silently into the building. When they reached the entrance of the building, Su Lu threw the extinguished cigarette but into the dustbin. Shang Qiu paused for a moment and then did the same. The two of them followed the passageway into the backup storeroom. In the past, the storeroom was abnormally spacious and quiet, with only the sound of assembly lines and mechanical arms. Today, however, it was abnormally lively because many people had come. Although those people were all standing in place at the moment, not whispering to each other, this atmosphere made Su Lu feel a little uncomfortable. He looked at the silver-white MX Mecha on the platform in the distance, and then at the seemingly small figures below the tall mecha. He narrowed his eyes. The director of the Ministry of National Defense's General Assembly Base had come, and so had the CEO of the Shell Motor Company. There were also many technical personnel from the military and the Research Institute. These people were all wearing dust-proof and radiation-resistant work clothes, goggles, and full equipment. They looked just like battleship maintenance personnel walking in space. It was impossible to tell their identities and positions. Sulu looked at those fully covered test officers and could not help but think of himself and the others smoking, eating, and exercising in front of the MX Mecha. He could not help but smile. As he walked down the metal stairs, Secretary Bai and Major Lan Xiaolong silently came up behind him. One was his personal secretary, while the other was a soldier under the orders of the Ministry of National Defense to protect the safety of others. Naturally, they would not be too far away from him. Major Lan Xiaolong looked at Shang Qiu beside Su Lu and raised an eyebrow, a hint of ambiguity in his eyes. Bai Yulan, on the other hand, maintained her calm and ladle-like expression, her head slightly lowered. Sula did not ask about the results of the inspection, because since Mr. Jose had informed him, the results would have to wait at the front. Sulu and Shang Qiu walked towards the MX Mecha. The sound of their footsteps was not loud, but it was exceptionally clear in the storeroom. The officers who had been talking in front of the mecha heard Mr. Jose say a few words, and then turned to look at the young man and woman, seeming somewhat surprised. A loud metallic clang drowned out the sound of their footsteps. The passageway between the backup storeroom and the engineering department had been completely opened, and that extremely thick and heavy alloy wall had been moved to another location. The engineers who had previously been at the engineering department headquarters to cooperate with the inspection work all walked over from the other side to join the people in the storeroom. These engineers carried incredibly complex emotions as they glanced at the MX Mecha that was now standing up on its own, basking in the feeling of being parents for the first time. Then, they turned their gazes towards the approaching Su Lu and Shang Qiu. These engineers knew very well that if not for these two young technicians, the engineering department would never have been able to complete the MX Mecha research and development so quickly. No one spoke. The spacious underground storeroom was silent. Suddenly, the skylight system above the storeroom switched on, and simulated natural light fell to illuminate the platform above. Under the natural light, the silvery white MX Mecha stood tall on the platform, the firepower system on its left mechanical arm fully engaged. The brand new design of the recirculating main cannon was silently and coldly aimed at the sky. The edges of the wings attached to the mecha's back flowed with eye-catching streamlines, as if in the next moment, this new mecha condensed for more than 10 years of Shell Motor Company's hard work would move. Right then, Su Lu and Shang Xiu had just reached the platform. He looked at Mr. Jose and Zhou Yu, but forgot to shake hands with these important people. Mr. Jose looked at the two young people in front of him with a complicated expression, suddenly feeling that he was the luckiest supervisor in the history of Shell Motor Company. A few years ago, he had discovered a genius like Shang Xiu in the engineering department, and then the heavens had delivered a freak like Su Lu to him. He nodded his head slightly. No one knew which engineers suddenly clapped, but the sound of clapping soon followed. Like the heavy rain that had just begun to fall that night, the clapping grew louder and louder, more and more urgent. It was as if the rain was getting heavier and heavier, roaring and howling, washing away all the gloominess of the world, leaving behind only the refreshing and clean sky. The thunderous applause rang out, echoing throughout the spacious underground storeroom. Even the CEO and the director of the Ministry of National Defense's General Assembly base began to smile and clap. Countless gazes turned to Su Lu and Shang Xiu. Countless claps were either for them or for themselves. The engineers were excited and rejoicing. They knew that the greatest contributors to the success of the MX Mecha's development were these two young people. Su Lu and Shang Xiu glanced at each other, and then their lips split into a childlike grin. The MX Mecha developed by the engineering department had passed the acceptance test. They had succeeded. The clapping continued for a long time. Some of the engineers' palms were already red from clapping, so they decided to just stomp their feet and kick up a fuss, as if insisting that Su Lu and Shang Xiu say something at this time. They were all technical personnel. Giving the glory to these two young people was equivalent to giving themselves respect. Su Lu looked around, his smile somewhat dazed. He lowered his head clumsily and bowed his thanks in all directions. For the sake of the Federation's new generation of mecha, the Shell Motor Company had begun research more than 10 years ago. Even before that, there had been scholars and experts working hard. The engineers around them had never stopped working, and some of the older experts had even bid farewell to this world during this long process. Every time Su Lu thought of this, he felt that the glory should belong to them, to those who were clapping. This was not a pretense or pretentious sentiment. He truly felt this way. He always felt that he had only solved the last problem. It was like building a skyscraper. The foundation and the body of the building had all been built by the predecessors. He had only built the last floor, yet he had to enjoy the applause and respect of so many people. He felt a little embarrassed. "You are really amazing." Su Lu forced himself to calm the excitement in his heart and looked at Shang Xiu beside him seriously. A young girl actually being able to complete the assembly design of a twin engine. If one had to say who was the biggest contributor, it should be Shang Xiu beside him. "I know that I am amazing in this area." Shang Xiu replied with a smile, but the two hands in her sleeves were already clenched into fists. Facing such a scene, how could she, who had dedicated all of her youth to this project, not be excited? Just like Su Lu, she bowed to the engineers around her in thanks. Her gray work uniform was still draped over her shoulders, bowing to all directions. When she lowered her head, who knew how many spring ripples were exposed in front of everyone's eyes, but she acted as if she did not know anything. "Oh!" Major Lan Xiaolong, who was behind Su Lu, called out softly. The engineers began to whistle, and the warehouse was filled with jubilation. After Shang Xiu stood up, Su Lu whispered beside her, "You did that on purpose? I am a supervisor, and I know how hard they have worked these past few years. Since they succeeded today, of course I have to give them some benefits." Shang Xiu beamed and said, "You contributed the most, so do you want me to give you some benefits?" Su Lu subconsciously glanced at Shang Xiu's bulging chest and quickly shook his head. Shang Xiu laughed twice, leaned over, stood on her tiptoes, and kissed him hard on the cheek, making a crisp sound. Su Lu touched his face and then scratched his head. He knew that this only meant that he was happy and did not mean anything else. However, in the eyes of the engineers around them, it was not just that. Therefore, the whistles became louder, and there were occasional jeers and shouts. The atmosphere in the warehouse suddenly reached a climax. Bai Yulan, who had been keeping his head down, also raised his head at this moment. He gently lit up a cigarette with a smile and gently took a puff. He was a non-smoker and would only make an exception when he was in an abnormal mood. Amidst the thunderous applause, he quietly thought to himself, when Su Lu and Shang Xiu were designing the assembly at the end, he, as the test pilot, had carried out many tests. Could this be considered some contribution to MX? Right at 4:32 p.m. that day, before the results of the joint inspection by the Ministry of Defense and the Shell Motor Company could be reported to the Federation, a headline appeared on the Federation's biggest news bulletin board. Shell Engineering Department's new MX mecha has been successfully developed. The Federation's biggest news bulletin board was called Star Sky. Every day, countless citizens of the Federation would choose to view or publish real-time news here. The news was divided into countless categories, so the main news section refreshed exceptionally quickly. That single headline was immediately squeezed into a dozen or so pages and did not attract much attention. However, immediately after, someone reposted the news on a Weibo, pointing out that the new MX mecha from the Shell Engineering Department had passed the joint inspection by the Ministry of Defense and the company's headquarters this afternoon. It wasn't until now that someone noticed this news. At the same time, the previously buried title was reopened by someone. Today, the most discussed topic of the Federation's citizens was the Federal Academy of Sciences' Purple Sea Mecha and the presidential election. The public's passion and understanding of mecha had been aroused to an unprecedented level. So this piece of news instantly garnered the attention of many people and was quickly pinned in red at the top. However, the public did not understand. The Federal Academy of Science had already developed the mecha, so why was the Shell Engineering Department still continuing? There were George Carlin supporters who began to denounce the Federation's government for blocking information and carrying out repetitive construction, wasting the resources provided by the taxpayers. There were also military enthusiasts who began to analyze the deeper meaning behind the Shell Motor Company's actions. However, without seeing pictures and videos, they also did not know what the difference between the Shell Motor Company's MX and the Federal Academy of Sciences' Purple Sea was. For a time, the heated discussion about the new Shell Motor Company's mecha continued into the middle of the night. However, most people expressed their lack of understanding towards the matter and began to doubt or even criticize the Shell Motor Company's intentions. Right at this time, a post titled, "An Open Letter from the Shell Engineers," was placed on the news bulletin board. Like a giant rock falling into water, it stirred up 1,000 ripples. Chapter 244. Don't ask for my name or citizen number. I'm not that stupid, even though writing this letter is stupid in itself. I also don't want to use any evidence to prove that I'm an engineer from the Nutshell Engineering Department, because this is an open letter written by me alone. Those who believe will believe, but those who don't can take it as a joke. The reason for writing this open letter is very simple. It's to explain. We know that the Academy of Sciences has already completed the development of the new MX mecha. At this time, the Nutshell Company still wants to develop another mecha. Many people won't understand, thinking that this repetition is a waste of the Federation's resources, but I want to remind you of one thing. A mecha is not a clay figurine. It's not something a 3-year-old child can casually rub on the beach to make. The clumsy clay figurine may have the innocent beauty of a child, but it definitely can't help the Federal Army gain too much in the battle against the Empire. This most sophisticated and complex humanoid machine needs a long time to develop. The Nutshell Company had the initial intention of developing the MX mech 30 years ago. After a long period of preparation work, the project was officially established 12 years ago. Countless experts, scholars, and technicians put in their youth and sweat to develop the first-generation prototype last autumn. And we know, you also know, that the Federal Academy of Science has never had a similar plan. They just suddenly started this year, So in terms of first come, first serve, the one wasting the Federation's resources should be the Federal Academy of Science, not the Nutshell Company. What I don't understand even more is that after the Federal Academy of Science started the development of the new MX Mecha, it only took a few short months to achieve success. How did they do it? We know that the Federal Academy of Science gathered the best scientists in the Federation, but I still don't believe that they have the technical ability, because if they did, the Federation's army would have already stepped on the soil of the Empire's capital. I'll repeat again, developing a mecha is not like making clay figurines, but the Academy of Sciences used the speed of making clay figurines to make it. Respect? Of course I respect it. Just like the cartoon on the Federation's children's channel, to be able to have this kind of speed, it's really amazing. I'm not accusing the Federal Academy of Science of plagiarism. Although everyone knows that the cartoon was plagiarizing, I'm just using a possibly inappropriate example. Especially when the target of this accusation is the Federal Academy of Science, which is deeply respected by all of us. We have to be more careful. Although there are rumors in the academic community, our Dean Lin's record is not as pure and clean as everyone thinks. Because it's related to the Federation's absolute technical secrets, I can't say some details, but I want to remind everyone of one name, Professor Shen Yulin. If anyone is interested, you can research this name. Also, I want to remind everyone that the student who owns all of Professor Shen's academic legacy is one of the technical supervisors of our Nutshell Engineering Department. Just a few months ago, this technical supervisor was under pressure from certain parties and was locked up in the district attorney's office. Fortunately, he has been released now. Whether or not the Shell Motor Company should have developed the MX Mecha, now that it has been developed successfully, the next step is to see whether the Federation government will choose the standards of the Federal Academy of Science or the standards of the Nutshell Company. From the perspective of a professional, I think this is a very simple proposition. I know that this open letter by one person will cause a lot of discussion, but I think, as an engineer of the Shell Motor Company, the conscience of a technical person and the principles of being a human being make me stand up and say these words. I don't want to see people who do things being criticized, while those who only know how to take the fruits of others' labor being made into statues and respected by others. A book friend finished writing this open letter last night. Oh, it's really well written. It gave me a headache, but I can't just copy him directly. The problem is that what he wrote was what I wanted to write from the very beginning. So, I had to change the way I wrote it. Sigh, I'm going to plagiarize just like the Academy of Science. There's a lot of content in the open letter, but it was basically just the tone of the person involved, using the tone of a tabloid to describe the so-called privacy of the Federation's academic community. This was a classic literary format. Anyone who was clear-headed would definitely feel that there were a lot of problems in this open letter. It was just that the things mentioned in this open letter were too explosive, so no one thought about the deeper problems. The open letter of this engineer had a total of 3,700 words. Not a single word was used to accuse the Federal Academy of Science of plagiarism, but the 3,000 words were actually all about this one problem. Anyone who read this open letter would know what this person wanted to say. The Federal Academy of Science was the most respected academic institution in the Federation, and Dean Lin was the leader of the academic community who was highly respected by the people. How could such an institution and scholar plagiarize? A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. The entire sky of the planet was suddenly filled with all kinds of posts. A portion of people directly vented their dissatisfaction with life in the Federation. Without even thinking, they began to use a fierce tone to scold the Federal Academy of Science for being shameless. A portion of the public who thought they were calm began to weigh their words and express their opinions. They thought that this matter was completely ridiculous. Most of these people thought that the engineer who published the open letter was not a staff member of the Nutshell Engineering Department at all, but was just a despicable person who wanted to see the world in chaos. The real black-bellied conspiracy theorists began to harshly criticize the engineer. They believed that this was nothing more than a game between the political forces of the upper echelons of the Federation, and that the Nutshell Mobility Company had used despicable means to obtain a huge order from the government. There were even more daring conspiracy theorists who connected it to the network spies that the empire had bribed. The silent majority, on the other hand, began to ponder the questions raised in the open letter. Doubts began to grow in their hearts. If Nutshell Corporation had begun the development of the MX Mecha more than a decade ago, why would the Federation's Academy of Sciences intervene halfway through? Moreover, who could explain the problems pointed out by the engineers? On the same night, the silent majority began to use the relatively free environment of the Federation's network to search for some information, especially regarding the gradually forgotten Professor Shinyulin. At 1 o'clock in the morning, someone found an article from many years ago in an academic journal. The article used an obscure tone to point out that the academic results used by Professor Shinyulin for the Federal Academy of Science to apply for the Nebula Award were mostly completed by Professor Shinyulin as early as 3 years ago. Professor Lin Yuanhu was the current leader of the academic community in the Federation, the head of the Federation's Academy of Science. When he applied for the Nebula Award, he was already a famous young professor in the Federation and had an extremely high reputation. Immediately after, someone found out that the academic journal that dared to publish the article about Professor Lin Yuanhu's plagiarism had its funding and authority revoked by the Federation's academic committee. In the end, the journal ended up closing its doors. At this point, the once glorious name of Shinyulin, the former Nebula Award winner, once again entered the public eye. The public found out on the internet that after that incident, Professor Shin left the Federal Academy of Science and entered the Shell Motor Corporation Research Institute. He disappeared from the academic community for more than 10 years. As for what he did after that, no one could find out. Everything left a trace. Lin Yuanhu probably didn't expect that the academic community of the Federation, which was under his control, would no longer dare to oppose him. But on the Federation's public network, the ancient information was still preserved. At 3:30 in the morning, someone finally found out about the incident at the Shell Motor Corporation Research Institute half a year ago. Not long after Professor Shinyulin's death, his laboratory had been sealed up, and that assistant researcher who had accompanied him at the end had been arrested. Now, his whereabouts were unknown. One problem after another was dug up by the public. Although it was just bits and pieces of evidence, coupled with their enthusiasm and imagination, a story of a top student suppressing his dissidence and shamelessly stealing the fruits of another's research had already been formed. The angry people became angrier and angrier, and the silent people also began to publish long articles full of logical reasoning. Even those bitter and mean conspiracy theorists, after a few hours of silence, began to jump out again. Only this time, their target was already the Federal Academy of Science, and even the Federation government. The first 40 pages of Planet Sky's discussion section were all discussing this matter. At this time, no one was concerned about whether the Federation's new MX Mecha standard was based on the Federal Academy of Science or Nutshell's latest standard. Everyone was only guessing whether plagiarism really existed. The media caught wind of the news, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, a reporter from the Federation's most widely circulated serious magazine, Galaxy, called the number of the Federal Academy of Sciences press officer. Over the phone, the reporter told the other party about what had happened on the internet that night and asked if the other party had anything to say in response. The internet is free, freedom is lawless, and lawlessness is untrustworthy. As the press officer of the Federation's highest academic institution, do you think I need to give any response to these unreasonable comments? The Federal Academy of Sciences press officer laughed loudly on the other end of the phone. I just want to tell you in private, regarding this kind of shameless slander against the Federal Academy of Science and Dean Lin, we will reserve the right to sue the rumor monger. After the reporter hung up, he shook his head. He thought to himself, you're still picking up the phone at 5 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, you haven't slept yet. It looks like you must have been disturbed by the news of the Shell Motor Company's successful research and the rumors of plagiarism on the internet. You could still laugh so heartily. It was unknown whether this reporter did not follow the principle of private conversation or whether some busybody had imitated the tone of this press officer. But in any case, on the internet's news bulletin board, a post similar to the content of this conversation appeared once again. Behind it, there were countless replies from the public. I'm so scared. My previous comments were caused by someone hacking my account. I did not bear any legal responsibility. I live in Bermuda. If you have the ability, cross the universe to hunt me down. The next day, it was also raining in the capital special district. Professor Shun was holding an umbrella. Just as he was about to walk through the gates of the first military academy, he was surrounded by countless reporters who came out of nowhere. He looked at the umbrellas, cameras, and camcorders all around him and was slightly taken aback. He did not understand what had happened. He slept extremely early every night, so naturally, he did not know what had happened at Shell Motor Company or what had happened on the internet. After being informed of the news on the internet by the reporters, Professor Shun was silent for a long time before he raised his head. A faint smile hung on his face as he said, "It's not convenient for me to say anything." At this moment, he knew that Su Lu, his father's favorite student before his death, had finally begun to seek something for his father in the underworld. His emotions were calm, but there was a trace of comfort in them. Professor Shun. What exactly was the problem between Professor Shun and Dean Lin back then? It said that they were colleagues in the same laboratory back then. Professor Shun. Is the ceiling of Professor Shun's laboratory related to the development of the MX mecha this time? There are rumors on the internet that Professor Shun's academic legacy is now owned by an assistant researcher. As the only heir to Professor Shun's legacy, do you have any comments on this? Professor Shun had not answered any of the reporter's questions, but when he heard these words, he stopped in his tracks. He turned his head and said seriously, "This sentence is true. According to the agreement between the Federation and the government, the final 10 years of my father's research results belong to my father. The Federation only has the right to use them, and this right has now been transferred to the hands of my father's student. The transfer process was witnessed by my lawyer and myself. If necessary, I am willing to repeat the above explanation again." The reporter's tiny recording pens faithfully recorded these few sentences. Another reporter asked anxiously regarding Dean Lin's plagiarism of Professor Shin Yulin's academic achievements, as well as the Federal Academy of Sciences' possible plagiarism of the Shell Motor Company's design. Can you say a few words? Professor Shun was silent for a long time. Then he shook his head and said, "I have no evidence." After this sentence, Professor Shin walked towards the campus in the autumn rain. His pace was calm. He was just like his father. Although he was angry at the injustice, he was more willing to devote his time and energy to meaningful research than to live a sad life like a woman. A rigorous scholar would not express any opinions without evidence. The ID Shell engineer had become a celebrity on the Federation's network, but no matter how hard they searched, they could not find the owner behind this ID. The Federal Academy of Science naturally did not make any comments on this matter, and the reporters who rushed to the Harbor City Industrial Park were also unable to interview any of the Shell Motor Company's employees. However, they finally received confirmation from the Shell Motor Company's news department that the Shell Motor Company had indeed successfully developed the new MX mecha. It passed the preliminary inspection by the Department of Defense and was temporarily named Little White Flower. There was no grand press conference. It was as if the weather was good to announce this important news. All the reporters felt a little uncomfortable. They did not understand why the Shell Motor Company was so low-key. Supervisor Jose walked into the warehouse and said to Su Lu, who was working hard at the workbench, "Did you go online last night?" Su Lu smiled. Mr. Jose did not say anything else. He only sighed and said, "The president's office called the CEO's office. Apparently, the CEO scolded the CEO, and then the CEO scolded me. Actually, what I want to say is that we have already done what we should have done. I believe that our research on mecha is more solid than the Federal Academy of Science. As long as we fight for it, the Federation's mecha standards in the future will definitely use us. Why do we have to cause trouble at this time? The Purple Sea from the Academy of Science should have a higher output than us," Shang Qiu replied. "But this is not the main point. I have always had my doubts about its stability." After saying this, Shang Qiu glanced at Su Lu. In fact, Everyone present was well aware that the person who had sent out the message last night must be present. The Shell Motor Company had developed the MX a little later than the Academy of Science. No matter how grand a press conference they held, it would not be able to achieve the sensational effect that the Academy of Science had. This kind of bottom-up, from the internet to the real world, could instead achieve good results. Sulu thought to himself that just getting the standards was not enough. Mr. Jose looked calmly at Sulu. He knew what he was thinking. This matter concerned Professor Shun's reputation. This genius technician would definitely not back down. There is no evidence. Mr. Jose was silent for a moment before saying, no matter how much the people talk about it, there is no evidence. After a while, it will die down. I'm thinking of a way to let the evidence grow on its own, said Sulu with his head lowered. Overnight, the entire Federation knew that the Shell Motor Company had also successfully developed the new MX Mecha. As for what standards the Federation should use, heated discussions began in the various official residences in the capital, in the offices of the Federation Management Committee, and in the staff meetings of the various military regions. Also overnight, on Star Sky, including the Federation's public network, any discussion of the new mecha was swept clean. The Federation government, on the grounds of protecting the secret of the new mecha, was forgiven by the majority of the public. After all, this was not a discussion about which restaurant's food was better. But because of this, the accusations of plagiarism involving Dean Lin Yuanhu were also strictly controlled under this reason. After a burst of autumn rain and a burst of cold, a black car slowly stopped in front of the hotel beside the Charter Square in the Capital Special District. After Li Xiuzhu got off the car, he raised the collar of his windbreaker, covering his handsome and calm face, and walked into the hotel. Using the special VIP elevator to reach the top floor, he pushed open the heavy door. Secretary Luo stood up to welcome him. Li Xiuzhu ignored him and hung his windbreaker on a hanger. He smiled slightly and said, "Are you confident tomorrow? We have already obtained the technical specifications of the Shell Motor Company. They are completely at a disadvantage. There will be no problems in tomorrow's meeting," said Secretary Luo softly. "Dean Lin will come after the meeting. Is the dean in a good mood?" Li Xiuzhu tried his best to keep his smile from showing any hint of schadenfreude. He walked to the window and looked at the brightly colored presidential residence in the distance. As long as the standards of the Academy of Sciences were used in tomorrow's meeting, what would those discussions count for? Chapter 245. That night, Li Xiuzhu invited Dean Lin for dinner. At the table, the two of them talked about the recent battle of mecha standards in the Federation. The data from the Federal Academy of Science and the Shell Motor Company had already been handed over to the government. As for who the government would choose in the end, it was still a long process of struggle. However, from Dean Lin's side, Li Xiuzhu had obtained some inside information and was relieved. As long as the purple CMX from the Academy of Science could completely suppress the little white flower from the engineering department in terms of technical specifications, it would be much more natural for him to take advantage of the situation and do some tricks outside the decision-making level. Generation after generation of aristocratic children appeared in the Federation, but there weren't many who could truly lead the society for a time. Li Xiuzhu was the first in line to inherit the Li family, but this was the first time he had appeared on behalf of the family alone. He had gone deep into the political circle to stir up trouble. This matter involved the presidential election and his own future, so he naturally couldn't allow his performance this time to fade into the crowd or even become a laughingstock. Today, the Federal Academy of Science had already been tied to the election war chariot of the two candidates. Even if Li Xiuzhu had too many opinions about Lin Yuanhu, it wasn't convenient for him to show them now. After all, if the Academy of Science lost the standards battle, the plagiarism controversy wouldn't be able to calm down even if it wanted to. This would also have a responsible impact on the presidential election. As a nephew, he wouldn't be so presumptuous as to show a black face to the leader of the Federation's academic community at the dinner table, but he really didn't have much interest in catering to the other party. Lin Yuanhu still had that noble and respectable expression on his face, as if he wasn't affected by the rumors accusing him of plagiarism among the people. Speaking of which, it made sense. After sitting in the position of the head of the Federal Academy of Science for so many years, his tenure was much longer than that of the president's. This kind of important figure would only smile slightly towards the discussions of the ordinary people and not care at all. After a dinner that wasn't very tasty ended, Dean Lin received the promise of continued support from Li Xiuzhu, and Li Xiuzhu also received the assurance that there wouldn't be any problems with the Academy of Science. They didn't taste much of the food, but both parties were quite satisfied with this interaction. Li Xiuzhu politely sent Lin Yuanhu out of the restaurant and walked toward the car outside the hotel's revolving door. He was like a real nephew showing respect. The old man and the young man were escorted by their secretaries and subordinates. When they were about to leave the hotel, they saw 6 or 7 people coming in from outside. Those people were young and wore very ordinary clothes. However, in the gloomy autumn day, they gave people a sense of calmness and experience. This high-class hotel was filled with high officials and nobles. With so many people coming and going, it was very lively. It was very normal to meet someone at the entrance of the hotel. Li Xiuzhu's footsteps slowed down a bit. At the same time, he noticed a man with small eyes in the group. He looked a little familiar. Secretary Lu's eyes flashed with a strange color. He leaned close to Li Xiuzhu's ear and whispered, "They're from the Nutshell Engineering Department. The small-eyed man in the middle is Su Lu." Li Xiuzhu's eyebrows jumped. He was a bit surprised, but he immediately remembered that the Federation was in the middle of reviewing the standards. The Nutshell Engineering Department would definitely send a technician over. He turned around and glanced at Su Lu imperceptibly. He also noticed a woman with an impressive figure and a pair of glasses beside Su Lu. He smiled and said softly, "The people from a Nutshell Engineering Department this time seem to be quite young." Shang Qiu, the key person in the twin-engine technology, Secretary Lu said softly. Li Xiuzhu's eyes were filled with surprise. He was just admiring the female engineer's temperament and impressive curves. He didn't expect this woman to be such an important person. "Say hello to your father for me." Lin Yuanhu walked to the side of the car and said lightly, "At the same time, tell Senator Macklin that the small fries in the Federation are nothing to be afraid of. Just like the hills under the moon, why should we be afraid of the wind coming from all directions?" Li Xiuzhu smiled slightly and replied softly. However, he didn't tell the other that the brat that the Federal Academy of Science hated the most was right behind them right now. He lowered his body and held the old man's hand with both hands. He was extremely respectful and kind. It was impossible to see the disgust he had for the old man in his heart. Bai Yulan went to handle the confirmation procedures for the room. Su Lu sat on the sofa in the lobby. His eyes were misty as he looked at the crowd beside the car outside the hotel. He narrowed his eyes. The old man beside the car seemed to be an extraordinary person. But who was the man who had sent him off? He was so beautiful that he could compete with Shi Qinghai. Shang Qiu sat beside him. She took off the strapless black slippers on her feet and casually stepped on her bare feet. She hugged her knees and looked especially cute. These past few days, the technicians from a Nutshell Engineering Department had participated in 4 seminars on mecha standards in accordance with the government's requirements. They had been running around the special administrative region of the capital city and were really tired. She followed Su Li's gaze and looked over. She smiled slightly and said, "Do you know that important person?" Su Li shook his head. "Director Lin Yuanhu." Shang Qiu's smile had a trace of playfulness. She pressed her face against her knees and yawned. "The person you can't forget. I didn't expect you to not know him at all." That old man was the leader of the Federation's academic community? Su Li narrowed his eyes. He had seen enough important people in his life, but Lin Yuanhu was the first person he had to defeat. So, at this time, his feelings were inevitably complicated. Since the old man was Lin Yuanhu, then the identity of the handsome young man who had sent the old man out of the hotel was naturally obvious. Other than the young master of the Li family, who else could be so devilishly beautiful and yet so calm? He turned his head and looked at the sleepy Shang Qiu. He couldn't help but shake his head. In the lobby of a high-class hotel, she could still be so relaxed and carefree. If the company had not reserved a room in advance, this hotel might have kicked them all out. A pair of small, white feet stepped on the edge of the sofa, a piece of leaf stuck to the heels. Su Li's gaze flickered, and he saw that face without any makeup but still clean and pretty. Also, because of her current posture, the curve of her chest was stubbornly bouncing up and down under the pressure. He had to admit that Shang Xiao did have the ability to charm people. It was just that her brain was already good enough. There was really no need to show off anything. The Nutshell Company was one of the leading corporations in the Federation. This time, when it came to the competition for the new mecha standards, the company naturally would not be stingy in terms of funding. They had directly booked the entire 24 floors of this high-class hotel that the politicians and wealthy businessmen of the Federation loved. The technical team took up 6 of the rooms, and the remaining rooms were handed over to the security team sent by the Whitewater Company. The remaining few rooms were left for Major Lan Xiaolong and his soldiers. Although it was said that the upper management of the Nutshell Company had some objections to the Ministry of Defense sending personnel to protect their own employees, when they thought of what the independent director had done that rainy night, the company's upper management could only remain silent. After that independent technical director had left Hong Kong that night, he had been staying in the hospital. The board of directors of the Nutshell Company had already passed the resolution to remove him from his position as a director. They were just waiting for the shareholders' meeting to officially pass the resolution and then report it to the management committee of the Federation. Sula didn't care about that director's future. He stood by the window, looking at the square below the 24 floors and the presidential residence further away, surrounded by green buildings. For the safety of the presidential residence, the height of the buildings in this area of the Capital Special District was strictly controlled. It was said that this high-class hotel, named Green Sun, was the tallest building in the district. The competition for the new mecha standards of the Federation would come to a conclusion tomorrow at the presidential residence. Su Lu thought of this, and his mood became heavy. The competition for the standards wasn't sent to the Ministry of Defense, nor to the Academic Committee. President Sieg had directly put it on the agenda of the office. What did this mean? Bai Yulan knocked on the door and came in. She helped him tidy up his clothes, made a cup of green tea, and then walked behind him. Following his gaze, she knew what he was thinking. She said softly, "The Academy of Sciences seems to be very confident in the past few meetings." During the meetings, the two sides hadn't shown any specific technical data. Sulu thought of the scene where Shang Xiao had confronted those old professors and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Shang Xiao's confidence came from her and her own abilities, but where did the Federal Academy of Sciences' confidence and even pride come from? Their data is definitely better than ours, Su Lu said, and they must have obtained Little White Flower's data through some means. No confidence? Bai Yulan passed the tea to him and asked softly. Su Lu took the teacup and looked at the swirling tea leaves in the water. After a moment of silence, he said, "I only hope that the company's influence is big enough for Mr. President to give both sides a fair chance to compete." What would be a fair chance to compete? Of course, it would be a mecha battle. Su Lu lowered his head and took a sip of the tea, savoring the fragrance in the slightly hot tea. He turned to look at Bai Yulan and smiled. "MX is a new thing. I believe that no one in the Federation is more familiar with its controls than you. Do you have confidence?" Bai Yulan lowered her head and was silent for a long time. She would only express her confidence when she considered all the factors involved. From the first MX test to this year, when Su Lu brought her into the Nutshell Engineering Department, she had seen all. She had even participated in it personally and provided a lot of experience for the technical staff. Su Lu wasn't wrong. No one in the entire Federation was more familiar with this new mecha than her. "I have confidence. Even if the ace of the military came, it would be the same," Bai Yulan answered with her eyes lowered. "The Purple Sea from the Academy of Science might have a higher output power than Little White Flower," Su Lu reminded her. "Although I don't know what you did in the past, I think that Purple Sea definitely has a fatal problem." Bai Yulan raised her head and looked at him calmly. As long as the pilot the Academy of Science is looking for is not Madman Li, then it's fine. Sula nodded. He had also considered the issue of test pilots before. Madman Li's ability was indeed terrifying, but the Lees of Philadelphia had always been on good terms with the Tai family. At such a crucial time, Madman Li couldn't be involved in this matter. Bai Yulan suddenly thought of something and frowned. The key is that the Academy of Science might not agree to the request for a mecha battle. They have the advantage in terms of data. If they only use a written evaluation, the Federation's new standards may very well be based on theirs. Why do they have to do this? This matter is not up to them. Sulu picked up his teacup and took another sip. He thought to himself that Secretary Shin's side had probably already made their move. The battle between the Federation's new MX mecha was definitely going to happen. The autumn rain had stopped long ago. Only a thin layer of fog hung over the streets of the Special Capital District. The other professors in the technical team obviously didn't sleep well. They were probably worried the entire night because of the standard confirmation meeting today. On the other hand, Su Lu and Shang Xiu seemed to be full of energy. Shang Xiu's confidence came from the things that Su Lu had told her, as well as a kind of fanatical worship of technology. Su Lu didn't have much confidence at all. He only believed in the influence that the Tai family had on the Federation. He even vaguely guessed that the meeting today at the president's office wouldn't be able to set the standards for the new mecha at all. They would only come up with a method to set the standards. Of course, what he hoped for was a mecha battle. This was the simplest and most direct way to slap the opponent in the face. The Nutshell Company's car picked them up from the entrance of the hotel. After only 5 minutes of driving, they arrived at the edge of a large green lawn. Everyone got out of the car and began to undergo strict security checks. The workstations that they brought with them were also moved to the president's office by specialized personnel. Sula looked at these special task force agents who were wearing black suits and white earphones. They weren't unfamiliar to him. When he was with Tai Ziyuan, he had seen many of them. When he thought about how important the Tai family was to President Sigurd, he was much more confident about today's standard meeting. They walked along the path in the middle of the lawn toward the president's office in the distance. The white president's office was faintly discernible in the thin fog, but didn't feel like it was floating. There was only a sense of solemnity from history and the awe of power. The president's office of the Federation would have its outer walls repainted every 10 years. The color of the outer walls was decided by the citizens through online voting. This decade, the color of the outer walls was white. From time to time, black cars would drive past them. Su Lu, Shang Xiu, and the others stepped to the side to let them pass. Looking at these custom-made luxury cars and the eye-catching special license plates on the cars, they knew that these people were all important people of the Federation who were here to attend the standard meeting today. Commander of the 1st Military Region, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Miles. Bai Yulan looked at the black car with a military license plate that had just driven past and whispered to Su Lu. He was from the 17th Armored Division of the 1st Military Region, so he was naturally very familiar with the car of this military leader. The cars of these important people naturally didn't need to go through the outer security checks. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the cars that disappeared into the fog. He knew that the National Security Advisor, the leaders of several major military regions, and many other important people were here. At this moment, his previous confidence was suddenly shaken. If these important people of the Federation were all inclined to adopt the standards of the Federal Academy of Science, would President Sigurd still care too much about Lady Tai's influence and the wishes of the Nutshell Company? He stopped thinking about these things and just looked at the cars that slowly drove past. As he looked at the president's office that was getting closer and closer, he felt some other emotions. This was the core of the Federation's power. These people were the embodiment of the will of tens of billions of citizens of the Federation. When he was at Donglin Zhonglo Street, he didn't dare to imagine that he would one day enter the president's office and pass by these important people. It was still early when they entered the president's office, so the meeting hadn't started yet. The technical team of the Nutshell Company was arranged to wait in the lounge. Shang Xiu was going to represent them to give the final concluding speech. At this moment, she was not just silently eating the snacks on her plate. "Are you a bit nervous?" Sulu gently clenched his fist and looked at the oil paintings on the walls of the lounge. Thinking that these were the things that the presidents of the Federation had seen with their own eyes and even touched with their own hands. Even though he was extremely slow when it came to power, he still felt a trace of the weight of history and the oppression of power. "A bit," Shangqiu said vaguely. She was wearing a light, blue formal suit today, which set off her beautiful figure. "When I think about letting those politicians and generals listen to the lecture and explaining those complicated technical terms clearly, I feel a bit of a headache." "I thought your nervousness was the same as mine, because we are in the president's office." Sulu smiled bitterly. "I came here once when I was in the 3rd grade. Shangqiu wiped the crumbs from her mouth and looked at Su Li's shocked expression. She explained with a smile, "The president's office is open to tourists once a week. What's so strange about it?" Sulu scratched his head awkwardly. He was an orphan from Donglan, so he naturally didn't know about these things. An official from the president's office came to inform them. Shangqiu followed him into the tightly shut conference room. The technical team of the Nutshell Company, including Sulu, began to stare blankly at the door at the end of the corridor. They didn't know what was going on inside and whether Shangqiu's presentation would be successful. It didn't take long for Shangqiu to come back with a computer. She sat beside Sulu, shook her head, and said, "I can't see any signs." "Then let's wait," Sulu said. No one would have thought that this wait would go on for an entire day and night. The biscuits of the president's office were indeed delicious, and the tea was truly a product of Mountain Mist. However, it wasn't a good idea to keep eating like this. Sulu looked worriedly at the door, a very bad feeling growing in his heart. Those important people had actually discussed for so long without a conclusion. One could imagine how intense the situation in the conference room must be. He was very worried. If the Federation government didn't even give the Nutshell Company a chance to battle Mecha, what else could he do? Everyone has seen the technical data. The National Security Advisor rubbed his somewhat numb forehead and said, "The Federal Academy of Sciences Purple Sea has the overall advantage." He looked at the president sitting at the back of the office and said with a smile, "Hufu, we've already given the Nutshell Company enough chances." Chapter 246. It was already late into the night. The Special Task Force agents in the garden around the president's official residence scanned their surroundings vigilantly. They listened to the system commands coming from their earpieces and did not relax in the slightest. They knew very well that if the Empire's spies had the ability to infiltrate the Federation and launch an attack on the president's official residence tonight, the Federation would definitely suffer the heaviest blow in history. This was because most of the current cabinet and most of the key members of the federal military were at the scene of the meeting in the president's office. Of course, under the glory of the Charter, no Empire spies had ever been able to penetrate deep into Planet S1. The Special Task Force agents' nervousness, to a greater extent, came from the weight of those important figures themselves. Mr. President Sieg, who only had 4 months left in his term, sat behind his desk and signed a document electronically. He then forwarded it to the office. Only then did he slowly raise his head and meet the National Security Advisor's gaze with a trace of sincerity, a trace of warning, and even a trace of pity. After a long silence, he said, "You guys discuss and come to a conclusion first." From 9 o'clock in the morning until midnight, the discussion in the president's official residence had not come to a conclusion, and there was no way to come to a conclusion. The new generation of mecha standards was indeed a big deal, but it was not enough for so many important figures to spend so much time on the approval of this standard. However, everyone in the official residence knew that the battle for mecha standards also faintly involved the issue of the next president, so they had to be cautious. The National Security Advisor, the commanders of the 1st Military Region, and the 2nd Military Region had already expressed their opinions. Since the Federal Academy of Sciences data was clearly superior to the Shell Motor Company's, the federal military should naturally adopt this set of standards. However, the president of the Shell Motor Company, who had been sitting in the corner all this time, refused to bow down and admit defeat under the support of the scientific advisor. In the end, the negotiations between the important political figures were not much different from a fight between children. With such a huge interest involved, no one would easily give in. During these dozens of hours of intermittent discussion, only Commander Zhong of the 4th Military Region of the West Woods, who was remotely connected, and the commander of the 3rd Military Region, who was sandwiched in the middle, had remained silent. President Sigurd glanced at the faces in the room, each with a different expression and different thoughts. He had a very different thought than usual. His term was coming to an end, and the members of the cabinet would naturally not discuss things as they used to. He knew very well that many people, including the National Security Advisor, were already considering their interests after the next president took office. It was just like the dramas that described the dynasty era. The officials could surrender and have other intentions, but the emperor could not do so. President Sigurd knew very well that he was not the emperor, but he did not need to be like these people and consider too many benefits. Even if he did help one side, could he still be the next president? In a few more months' time, he would only be an ex-president, and the treatment and respect he deserved would not be reduced in the slightest. It was precisely because of this reason that he had not made a final decision regarding the mecha standards this time around. Even though the Academy of Sciences mecha standards had already received the support of the majority of the military, and the Shell Motor Company's efforts could be wasted at any moment, President Sieg remained silent. The two major factions in the Federation government had already shed all pretense of cordiality at this moment, and the side that supported the Federal Academy of Science had already gained an overwhelming advantage. The National Security Advisor narrowed his eyes and looked at President Sigurd, thinking to himself, "You are just a pile of mud that you helped into office. Who would allow you to play these kinds of tricks at this time?" This teacher and close friend of Mr. President was just about to use words to force President Sigurd to make a decision when a notification sounded in the office's communication system. Space Fleet Connecting. Hearing this, everyone in the president's office perked up. Even Commander Zhong, who had been dozing off on the screen, slowly raised his head. In this kind of situation, if that 3-star female general of the space fleet expressed some kind of opinion, it would be decisive. After filtering the image for a while, the face of a female general appeared on the screen, hanging in the president's office. This female general was around 45 years old. Her facial features were cold, and the lines of her face were as sharp as a knife. Looking at her made people feel as if they were stabbed in the heart by an ice knife. Han Yuliang, the only 3-star female general of the Federation. She led the 3 major fleets of the Federation and walked in the universe. She fought at the edge of the interstellar system, and her achievements were outstanding. It had been 4 years since she had landed on the surface of a planet. She was like a meteorite in the universe, full of sharp edges and cold. What are your thoughts? President Sigurd recounted the previous discussion and the dispute between the two sides and asked the female general on screen. "Mr. President, I have already looked at the technical data of both sides. I think that the Federal Academy of Science has the advantage." The female general on the screen looked at everyone coldly and said, "The threat of the Empire is right in front of you, and you people still have so much interest in scheming against each other. Don't you know the meaning of shame?" Everyone in the president's office was a big shot. Although General Hong Yuliang had a lot of experience and great achievements, any one of them would be able to suppress her. However, she just had to say it so bluntly, directly piercing through the masks on everyone's faces. Everyone in the office smiled helplessly, but they didn't have any strong reactions. They were all very clear about this female general's temper. No one could do anything to her. "Mr. President, time is of the essence. I support the standards of the Academy of Science," said Han Yuliang. "Actually, that's what I mean." The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was also the commander of the 1st Military Region, sighed tiredly and said, "The Empire is already ready to make a move. The people don't know, but we know. We can't waste any more time on these things." After the words of the 2 big shots in the military came out, the expression on the face of the president of the Shell Motor Company became a bit ugly. He He looked at the president's scientific advisor, and they both knew that they might lose without a fight today. Although President Sigurd's attitude was still unclear, most of the generals in the military had already expressed their attitudes. In this kind of situation, the president also had to respect the other party. The vice president, who represented the Academy of Science, stood up with a smile and said to the general in the office and the two generals on the screen, "The results of the conference have already proven that the Purple Sea developed by the Academy of Science has completely suppressed the design of the Shell Motor Company in all aspects. I can guarantee to the Federation that the new mecha from the Academy of Science will definitely be able to help the Federal Army achieve unprecedented success in the war with the Empire." Just as he finished speaking, the heavy wooden door of the president's office was pushed open. The deputy director of the office, Boog, walked in with a strange expression and said, "Philadelphia called." The atmosphere in the president's office became abnormally strange because of the words "Philadelphia called." The commanders of the 3 military regions and the female general of the Space Fleet began to tidy up their military uniforms. Commander Zhong of the 4th Military Region opened his eyes abruptly, and the rest of the people were slightly stiff. They didn't know if this sentence was true or not. Philadelphia called? That old man seemed to have not cared about the affairs of the Federation for more than 10 years. Why did he take the initiative to contact the president today when discussing the mecha standards? The expression of the National Security Advisor froze for a moment before returning to normal. He also didn't think that such an unexpected situation would happen. But then he thought that no matter how respectable that old man's status was, this was still an important matter for the Federation. The other party couldn't just use his status to mess around. There was no video, but an old voice sounded from the phone in the president's office. A mecha standard actually took 1 day and 1 night to discuss. Then, if the Empire invades again, do we have to discuss this for 2 months? Do we even need to invite the members of the Federation Management Committee to participate in the discussion? President Sieg smiled slightly and said into the phone, "Do you have any suggestions?" The voice on the other end of the phone said slowly, "Mechas are used for battle. The data is not important. 2 mechas fight, and we just need to see the result." The president's office was silent. No one would have thought that this great military god, who had not spoken about the Federation's affairs for more than 10 years, would actually speak up for the sake of the new mecha standards. Furthermore, the method he suggested was so primitive and barbaric and even a little naive. However, no one raised any objections. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Miles, stood up and saluted into the phone. He said, "General Miles reporting to the division commander. We will definitely complete the mission." Years ago, during the first intergalactic pursuit against the Empire, General Miles was the battalion commander of the 17th Armored Division, and General Ipifu was the division commander of the 17th Armored Division. At this time, the other generals in the office had also stood up and listened respectfully to Fei Cheng's call. For the federal military, Fei Cheng's call was not a suggestion, but an order from their superiors. They only needed to follow orders. President Sieg stared at the phone in front of him. He did not feel that his authority was being challenged. Although the scene in front of him was a little ridiculous, and the Federation military did not respect the president and that old man, he knew that this was caused by history. As long as that old man was still alive, the Federation president's position in the hearts of the military would never be as high as it was stipulated in the Constitution. The National Security Advisor had been silent all this time. At this time, he suddenly said, "Sir Marshal, if a mecha battle is to take place, naturally there needs to be a fair environment. Can we allow both sides to freely choose their own pilots?" The battle for the new mecha standards of the Federation, after a day and a night of stalemate, was finally resolved with a phone call. It returned to the traditional mecha battle in the military camp. Although everyone knew that this method would not be able to fully display the new mecha standards of both sides, it was still a relatively fair method. Sulu, who had been in the lounge of the president's official residence for more than 10 hours, finally heard the news after going to the washroom a few times. This news was not unexpected. It was also the best method he had imagined, because the Academy of Science's mecha data did indeed have the advantage. However, he did not know what kind of struggles and secret compromises the big shots in the Federation's cabinet had gone through in order to achieve this mecha battle. He also did not know that this situation had been decided by the military god of Fei Cheng. Other than Shang Xiao, who had entered the president's office to explain, the rest of the technical team had not had the chance to enter. They had originally planned to explain some of the characteristics of the MX mecha to those big shots, but it seemed that those big shots did not need this at all. They would only do things according to their wishes. That night, returning to the 24th floor of the hotel, Su Lu looked at the dimming lights of the president's official residence in the distance. Thinking of Mr. CEO's solemn instructions, his heart also became heavy. This was already the last chance they could fight for. In a mecha battle, Nutshell definitely could not afford to lose. The mecha battle location has been chosen at the Old Moon base. Su Lu took the teacup and said seriously to Bai Yulan beside him, "The time is 3 days later. There's still time to make the initial preparations. However, this place is disadvantageous for us. The low-gravity environment will magnify the difference in instantaneous power output. Mobility is especially important at the Old Moon base. You need to be mentally prepared." Bai Yulan held her teacup with both hands and nodded lightly. She said softly, "Understood." Su Lu turned around, his eyelids drooping as he repeated the calculations he had done countless times in his mind. He said, "You must force the opponent into an overclocking battle. The Academy of Science did not do enough self-checks, so they definitely haven't discovered that problem yet. Under the overclocking state of the electronic jets, the longest stable time is only 3 minutes. You just need to drag on for 3 minutes, and their purple sea will be destroyed for everyone to see." Concentrating the power of both engines to make an instantaneous increase in power output was an operation that would only be used in an absolutely intense mecha battle. At this time, Su Li's request for Bai Yulan to drag the Academy of Science's purple sea into this state and maintain it for 3 minutes was a very difficult request. "No problem." Bai Yulan lowered her head and said softly, "After hearing what you said, my confidence is increasing. I even somewhat hope that the opponent will choose Madman Li as their pilot." Su Li laughed, shook his head, and said, "This possibility is too small." Previously, the president said that this mecha battle was the intention of the Lees of Philadelphia. "It's obvious that they are helping us. How can Madman Li participate?" Li Xiaozhu stood by the window with a gloomy expression. He didn't know that Su Lu had been standing by another window not far away, looking at the president's residence with him. The news that came earlier made him feel somewhat unhappy. His family had spent a lot of money to convince the National Security Advisor. They had also used their relationship with the First Military Region and the threat of the Empire to make the big bosses of the federal military firm their stance. However, he didn't expect that all of this would disappear because of a call from Philadelphia. "Don't worry about anything. There is only one energy-saving lamp in the room, so the light was somewhat dim." The president of the Academy of Science, Lin Yuanhu, sat on the sofa in the luxurious suite. His expression was very calm as he looked at this young nephew of his and said, "It's just 3 days later than scheduled." Li Xiaozhu turned his head and forcefully hid the trace of displeasure on his face. He smiled and said, "It's good that Uncle Lin has confidence. I have confidence in the research ability of the Academy of Science." Lin Yuanhu's expression slightly darkened. This afternoon, he and Li Xiaozhu had been waiting in the hotel for the news from the president's residence. Because of the press conference that the Federal Academy of Science held without authorization, this old man knew that President Sieg had a lot of opinions about him. Even the big bosses of the military had secretly scolded him. It was all thanks to the Li family's help that the anger was quelled. Since this was the case, it was naturally inconvenient for him to go to the president's office. Therefore, he only sent a deputy president as his representative. However, he didn't expect that after waiting for more than 10 hours, he would end up with such an awkward result. A trace of displeasure and vigilance appeared in the heart of this leader of the Federation's academic community. "You rest first. I still have to arrange some things." Li Xiaozhu smiled slightly and walked out of the room. Just outside the room, he first called his father. The head of the Li family naturally already knew about the decision of the president's residence, but he needed to know if there were any follow-up arrangements from his father's side. The head of the Li family's calm voice came from the other end of the phone. There's nothing for you to do now. The National Security Advisor will take care of it. Yes, father. In the afternoon of the second day, Major Li Feng, who had been on his shift from the front lines and had stayed in the capital ring for almost half a year, walked out of the Army General Hospital with a dark expression. Zhou had already been discharged from the hospital, but no one had informed him. Although with his background, even if he rushed into the West Mountain compound, no one would dare stop him. But after all, he still had to think about the honor of his family. Thinking about the phone call he had received from the Ministry of Defense, Li Feng's expression became even darker. They actually wanted him to go to the Old Moon Base to participate in some kind of mecha battle? Or was it on behalf of those old scumbags from the Academy of Science? Now, he was very clear that Su Lu had participated in the MX of the Nutshell Mobile. Once he thought of the possibility of smashing that brat's hard work into pieces, he had a kind of desire and excitement. However, Mad Manly was not a real lunatic after all. He knew very well that there were many things hidden behind this phone call. Father, what's going on? Li Feng asked the middle-aged general on the other end of the phone. I remember you said last time that the MX of the Nutshell Mobile seems to have some connection with the madam's side. The National Security Advisor mentioned this matter to your grandfather. After all, you are a soldier, so naturally, you have to obey military orders. It's not good for the family to say anything. Li Feng seemed to have understood something. He suddenly had the urge to beat the white-haired National Security Advisor to death. But in the blink of an eye, he felt a trace of excitement. It was always good to be able to participate in this matter. After a moment of silence on the other end of the phone, his father said, Our Li family has a personal relationship with the Federation, but there are no factions. We are only loyal to, and can only be loyal to, the Federation. The MX Mecha is involved in the great matter of resisting the invasion of the Empire. Do your best and choose the best one. This is what your grandfather told you. Chapter 247. In the deep blue space, countless stars were quietly watching the spaceships flying among them. The people on the spaceships were also watching them. In the field of vision below the dark star field, a giant hexagonal space station was reflecting the light of the stars. It was brighter than any of the stars in the field. The hexagonal space station quietly overlooked the surface of planet S1, ready to accept the spaceships that leaped out of the atmosphere at any time. Su Lu stood beside the porthole, squinting his eyes as he watched the space station not far away. He was slightly excited. He had experienced space travel before. The last time he took the ancient bell from Donglin to the capital ring, it was at the giant space station that he took the spaceship to transfer to. However, the spaceship he took today did not stop at the space station. Instead, it directly broke through the gravitational pull and atmosphere of planet S1 and flew into space, heading towards the Old Moon Base. The Shell Motor Company had its own commercial fleet. It was not large in number, but its performance was excellent. The technical team was going to the Old Moon Base to participate in the test battle of the new MX Mecha. Naturally, the headquarters provided the best spaceship, so there was no need to resupply or transfer at the space station. The light of the stars outside the window suddenly dimmed. Su Lu knew that the spaceship was changing direction. He walked back to his seat and looked at the serious expressions of his companions. He could not help but feel a little nervous. The technical staff of the Shell Motor Company were all wearing dark, gray military uniforms. This was because, in a sense, they were all non-staff members of the Federal Army. Even Shang Xiu was a civilian major. In this spaceship, the only people who were not wearing military uniforms were Secretary Bai, who was beside Su Lu, and the CEO, who was sitting in the luxurious private room at the front of the spaceship. Bai Yulan had made a big mistake in the Army years ago and was expelled from the Army. The CEO did not want to use military uniforms to boost his confidence. The CEO of the Shell Motor Company if placed in a place like East Forest or West Woods of the Federation, would be at the level of a district chief executive. A few days ago, the attitude of the Shell Motor Company during the internal struggle of the Federation was clearly not in line with the status of this giant company in the Federation. Sulu thought of a CEO who was in his 40s and had some doubts in his heart. The CEO of the Shell Motor Company had not shown much in the past few days. The main reason was that the management committee of the Federation had appointed him as the CEO of the Shell Motor Company less than a year ago. Coincidentally, when he took over, many problems within the company. After the failure of the experiment last autumn, the Federal Academy of Science shamelessly and overbearingly joined in with the excuse of participating in the design of the dual-engine technology. This was an official decision made by the Federation's academic committee, so the Shell Motor Company could not use this to accuse the other party. However, right after that, the Academy of Science had stolen the data from Shun Yulin's laboratory. That independent director of the Shell Motor Company had also encountered some problems. All these troubles had gathered together, making this newly appointed CEO angry, but also somewhat anxious. If the internal strife within the Shell Motor Company's board was like the internal strife within the Federation and had not been completely settled, the CEO could not spend all his time on these political squabbles. He knew better than anyone the importance of the MX Mecha to the Federation and to the company. Thus, he personally led the technical team and boarded this spaceship headed for the Old Moon. The flight through space was truly rather tedious. Those provocatively dressed dancers on the screen did not attract too much attention. Everyone in the technical team was deep in thought about the mecha battle that would begin the day after tomorrow, analyzing the technical aspects that they were responsible for to ensure that there would not be any loopholes. Shanxiu had not come with the technical team. The mecha battle testing, data analysis, and evaluation work at the Old Moon base would be carried out in the control hall on the ground. She still had very important work to do, so she'd stay behind. Sulu looked at by Yulan beside him, who had her head lowered the entire time. He could not help but think that if Shangqiu had been by his side right now, the journey would probably not have been so boring. Secretary Bai was too quiet and quiet. She really was not a good travel companion. Right at this moment, a voice rang out from the communicator. Sulu was slightly taken aback, but then he got up from his chair and walked towards the room where the CEO was. Not long after, he walked back and sat back down with a heavy expression on his face. He could not help but glance at Bai Yulan again, wondering if he should tell her this news now or when the mecha battle begins. Bai Yulan saw the change in his mood and asked softly, "The other side has chosen?" "Yes." The mecha battle testing this time was of the utmost importance and had attracted the attention of countless people. Both sides would definitely choose the most experienced and most capable pilot in the Federation. Sulu guessed that the other side would not have guessed that Nutshell Company had long since made the decision to use Bai Yulan as their pilot. However, he also did not expect that the other side would actually have a way to persuade that fellow to come personally. After a moment of silence, he said, "It's mad manly." Bai Yulan's delicate eyebrows rose, then calmed down. Like a small stone thrown into a lake, it settled down after a slight ripple. After a moment of silence, he took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it up, and took a deep puff. Sul had always thought that Secretary Bai did not smoke. He did not know that that night, when Bai Yulan had seen him operate the old mecha and make so many fierce attacks, she had secretly smoked a cigarette. He also did not know that when MX had succeeded, Bai Yulan had also smoked a cigarette. It was not that Secretary Bai did not smoke, but he would only light one when he felt a real tremor. The smoke detectors in the spaceship began to beep, and the electronic female voice began to warn them. The surrounding technical team members were all startled out of their thoughts and looked curiously at Sulu and Bai Yulan's seats. Then they saw the two heavy and slightly tired faces, and in an instant they understood something. Hearing the warning from the electronic female voice, Su Li's mood was somewhat irritated, and he wanted nothing more than to kick the loudspeaker away. What I was afraid of has come. Bai Yulan only took 3 puffs before the cigarette between her fingers burned to a crisp. He coughed lightly and said, "Boss, Looks like the people behind you are not as powerful as you think. At some point in time, Bayulan had begun to refer to Su Lu as boss. Perhaps it was because of the 20 million Federation dollars. Sula knew what she meant. In the special capital region, the two of them had had a long conversation. The Tai family, who had always stood behind Su Lu, had always had a close relationship with the Lees of Philadelphia. Why did that lunatic from the Lee family want to interfere in this mecha battle this time? Mr. CEO had also just received the news. Su Lu was currently in the spaceship. Even though he had hundreds of questions in his heart, he could not make a phone call to clear them all up, so he could only remain silent. Secretary Bai lowered his eyes slightly, and his fingers slowly pinched the remaining half of the cigarette. Thinking of the insufferably arrogant opponent in 2 days, he also fell silent. Just as the two of them were silent, a barren planet appeared in front of the spaceship. The earthy yellow surface of the planet was even clearer under the light of the stars. Only the pearl-like structures on the surface and the black materials scattered all around reminded people that this was not an uninhabited barren planet, but the largest companion of planet S1, Old Moon. Humanity's second entry into the universe, and the first planet to be officially developed was one of the 2 moons, Old Moon. In the literature, this satellite that had accompanied planet S1 for billions of years was called Moon Number 1, but the people of the Federation usually called it Old Moon. The development of the Old Moon had been going on for many years. Although scientists had tried to recreate the ecosystem, they had failed time and time again. The phenomenon of atmospheric escape in a low-gravity environment could not be eliminated. However, the development of the Old Moon by humans was extremely deep. Those pearl-like structures that could be seen from space were actually as many as 700 residential bases. The bases were covered with high-strength, multi-layer, rigid membranes that filtered the blazing light of the stars and the omnipresent cosmic rays. At the same time, the life support system of the bases was isolated from the outside world. The black material that was about to cover a quarter of Old Moon's land area was transformed from the mineral resources of the 4 neighboring planets into a solar energy collection and absorption material. Now, it was completely capable of supplying energy to countless military and civilian bases on Old Moon. The ubiquitous black was one of the 5 largest planetary transformation activities in the history of the Federation. It cost a lot of money and time, and it was one of the greatest glories of humanity. Under the pen of a poet, they would often describe how the giant pen of humanity painted a barren planet in the sky with a layer of unnatural color. It was naturally earth-shattering to be able to change the world. Of the 700 bases on Old Moon, the largest was naturally the Federal military's main assembly base and the Shell Motor Company's spaceship manufacturing factory. It was said that in the military control zone on the dark side of the moon, there was a super-large base that was specifically responsible for supplying the 3 major fleets of the Federation. However, the ordinary people of the Federation would never be able to see its true appearance. Under the guidance of the Flight Control Center on Old Moon's surface, a pale white commercial spaceship drew a nearly straight arc as it headed towards the predetermined landing site. Just by looking at the exterior design of the spaceship, it was obvious that this was a direct endurance spaceship that could break through the S1 atmosphere. On the side of the spaceship was a line of very eye-catching words. Where there is metal, there is fruit shell. Seeing the pearl-like large bases becoming clearer and clearer, the technical team members on the spaceship had already stood up and let out waves of exclamations. Humanity's transformation of the universe always made these engineers feel a sense of respect from the bottom of their hearts. These engineers and professors were researching mecha, not space battleships. For most of them, this was their first time at Old Moon bases, and that kind of excitement was indescribable. At this time, they were not even willing to think about the mecha battle that would take place the day after tomorrow. The boundless black sea that stretched out like the grasslands of the Eastwood region was indeed an extremely magnificent sight. And those pearl-like bases that were covered by a giant membrane were also an exciting process. Sulu should have been excited by everything in front of him, But the extremely bad news during the journey made his heart feel a little heavy, and he actually somewhat ignored this magnificent scenery. The Shell Motor Company's exclusive spaceship did not land at its own base, but instead flew directly to the Ministry of Defense's Space Assembly Base. Accompanied by the loud sound of airflow and the electronic positioning siren, the spaceship steadily landed on the dock, and then a large piece of shrinking equipment placed it underground. The alarm was lifted, and the technical team disembarked from the spaceship. They sat on the self-propelled electric scooter below the spaceship and followed the 10-kilometer-long underground tunnel towards the dark and quiet front. Mr. CEO had a special car to pick him up and had already left. The moment they left, Sulu noticed that Mr. CEO's expression was a little gloomy. Beside him, his secretary was holding a phone and arguing nonstop with certain parties. The CEO of Nutshell probably also smelled a trace of danger. There were too many people in the Federation who did not want Nutshell to get the standard for the new mecha. Thinking of this, Sulu could not help but feel a little cold. Even if the Iron Schemer was one of the 7 great families in the Federation, how could they have such a huge influence? He looked at his phone and confirmed that there was signal in the underground tunnel, so he directly called Secretary Shen. Over the phone, he told the other party the news he had just received, and then quietly waited for the other party to reply. Shunli was silent for a long time on the other end of the phone before saying, "I just verified this news. According to the intelligence report, it should be that Senator Macklin who gave the idea to the National Security Advisor. As for the Philadelphia side, I don't have that kind of influence." "What about the madam?" Sulu continued to ask. If it was in the past, no matter who the other party chose to be the pilot, it would not affect his confidence in Little White Flower and his judgment of the Purple Sea. However, Li Feng was different. He was a madman, the only grandson of the Lees of Philadelphia, and a rare super pilot in the federal military. At this time, if Sulu and Madman Li were to fight, he would not mind. However, as Bai Yulan had said before, when it came to mecha piloting, Madman Li's ability was too terrifying. This was a result of his battle record. Sitting under the huge dome, Sulu looked at the layer of transparent film 10 meters away from him through the glass. He was curious about the material of the film and the operating principle of the gravity replenishment device in the base. Only when he was in space could he truly feel the extent to which the technological civilization of the Federation had developed over the past tens of thousands of years. Even though he was known as a genius in mechanical engineering, it was impossible for him to completely understand the intricate technological fields. After a few calls, there was no good news. Mr. CEO's secretary had called earlier and helplessly said that the company's negotiations with the Federation government had all failed. This was because in the meeting in the president's office, the military god of the Lees of Philadelphia had personally promised the National Security Advisor that both parties could choose whichever pilot they wanted. It was because of his heavy mood that Sulu decided to just focus on the structure of the final assembly base. However, no matter how he looked at the scene in space outside the film, he still could not calm down. There was even a faint trace of regret in his heart. If he had known this would happen, should he have asked Madman Li to be the pilot for Nutshell first? The living area of the final assembly base was very quiet. On the dome, about a few hundred meters high, the automatic superlight cleaning maintenance robot was slowly working along the alloy framework. Sulu picked up the teacup in front of him and took a sip. He then felt that his thoughts were really a little unfair to Bai Yulan in front of him. "What you said in the hotel that day was a lie," Bai Yulan said softly. Bai Yulan said softly, "I've seen Li Feng operate a mecha with my own eyes. I don't have the slightest bit of confidence against him. However, since our goal is only to drag that Purple Sea into an unrestricted battle for 3 minutes, it is possible." Hearing this, Su Li's mood gradually calmed down. If they wanted to go head-to-head with the only remaining seedling of the Lees of Philadelphia, there was no point in looking for other ace pilots in the federal military. In comparison, Secretary Bai's understanding of the new MX Mecha was deeper than anyone else's. Moreover, Sulu had always believed that this delicate man's strength had never been fully utilized. It won't change anything. Sulu picked up the teacup and said seriously, "Let's deal with him." Bai Yulan picked up the teacup and clinked it lightly with him. After hurriedly finishing the cup of tea, the technical team did not stay for long. They immediately rushed towards the core area of the base. Yesterday, Nutshell's MX Mecha had already been transported from the port to the Old Moon base under the close watch of the military. According to the schedule, they were about to begin the mecha combat test, modifying the outer armor and weakening the firepower of the mecha. The technical team members of Nutshell's engineering department naturally had to watch with their own eyes. Otherwise, who knew what those mechanics from the Ministry of National Defense would do to their precious mecha? The members of the technical team went through the chip scan one by one and obtained temporary access to the Old Moon base. They walked toward the underground warehouse. They saw the mecha in the center of the warehouse in the distance and began to get excited. Although it had only been 7 days since they last saw each other, to these people, it felt like a long time. Sulu and Bai Yulan were still walking at the back. There was no problem with the chip scan. However, just as the two of them were about to enter the warehouse, a group of armed soldiers surrounded them. Sulu, the technical director of the Nutshell Engineering Department, an official in a black suit, asked coldly. Sulu narrowed his eyes and said, "Yes, you can go in now." "This person stays," the official said as he pointed at Bai Yulan. Sulu narrowed his eyes even more. He asked why. Bai Yulan was suspected of illegally selling military equipment to foreign countries. Therefore, he cannot enter the core area, the official replied. Sulu knew about Secretary Bai's crimes. However, the military court did not convict him. Why did some people suddenly appear at such an important time? Unexpectedly, the faction from the Federal Academy of Science started to make their move again. Not only did they use Mad Manly as a test pilot, they also tried to stop Bai Yulan at the last minute. He looked at the official's cold face and suddenly said, "This is a test pilot from Nutshell's company. He cannot enter the core area? Then how will the mecha battle start? Can you bear this kind of responsibility? Not only can he not enter the core area, he will have to follow me immediately for further investigation." The official smiled and said, "You don't have to scare me with the MX mecha battle. I am not a Federation official. Are you done yet? Are you done yet?" Sulu could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. He stared into the official's eyes and said loudly, "I don't care what kind of F***king official you are. If you dare to stop us, let's see how you will answer to the president." Chapter 248. Sulu had met many big shots in the Federation, not to mention the president, who had been very kind to him throughout the journey and had solemnly instructed him to do so. Even a mother and son of the Tai family, as well as General Zoingxing, were all big shots that could shake the surface of a planet with just a word from the Federation. However, meeting big shots did not mean that he could completely understand the way they did things. To be more precise, he still had not gotten rid of the moral standards of the citizens at the bottom of the hierarchy. He always thought that no matter if it was a politician or a politician, they would still need to maintain their dignity and do things according to the rules of the Federation. Even if they were faced with a strong conflict of interest, the way these people snatched benefits was always elegant, calm, and confident. It was just like how the Federal Academy of Science took the data of Professor Shun from the Husk Institute. Everything was done so cleanly, and they looked down from above, swallowed mountains and rivers, and silently flowed like a clear spring, until today, when he first heard that Mad Manly was selected to be the pilot. And then this guy who called himself an official of the Bureau of Proclamation led soldiers to stop Bai Yulan and was about to arrest her. Sulu finally understood that when the big shots in the upper echelons of the Federation had their fundamental interests infringed, they would not hesitate to show their greedy and cold appearance. As long as they had the slightest reason, they would use extreme methods and do things to the extreme. They would endlessly show the realm of shamelessness that they could reach. What does this have to do with the Bureau of Proclamation? If you want to go to military court, it's the Department of Defense's business. Because of this understanding, Su Lu could no longer suppress the anger that he had been suppressing for a long time. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the official in front of him. His gaze was like a knife that could cut the indifferent face of the other party into countless mottled pieces at any moment. Correspondingly, he could no longer play the role of a silent, optimistic, and cheerful technician. Instead, he began to emit a lonely and ruthless aura from his bones. What does this have to do with the Bureau of Proclamation? The Bureau of Proclamation doesn't need to tell you. The official ignored his anger and replied with a smile. The Bureau of Proclamation was usually only responsible for coordinating with the work of the government. They rarely showed themselves directly. Today's trip to the Old Moon Base was due to the persuasion of some powerful people within the Federation government. In fact, the Shell Motor Company had already entered the Old Moon Base. At this time, only a transcendental existence like the Bureau of Proclamation would dare to challenge the rules of the entire Federation. They would not hesitate to destroy an important new mecha test battle just to arrest this pilot named by Yulon. This official was not worried about the Shell Motor Company's counterattack. The Bureau of Proclamation rarely took action, but once it did, no government would dare to go against it, let alone an enterprise. Under the glory of the First Charter, these officials seemed to be covered with a layer of inviolable brilliance. Sula stood in front of Bayulon and unceremoniously slapped the gun barrel away. His strength was so great that even a casual slap caused the soldier's wrist to ache. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became tense. "What are you looking at?" Sula narrowed his eyes and scanned the stiff attitude of the soldiers around him. He said in a low voice, "Shoot me if you dare." At this time, he naturally thought of that rainy night in the industrial park of Harbor City. However, at that time, he and Bayulon were facing the mercenaries of the Whitewater Company. Today, however, he was facing an official from the Bureau of Proclamation and the soldiers of the Federation. Over and over again, the schemes of the upper class of the Federation and the cold and unreasonable sledgehammers kept falling on his head. He was really tired of it. However, last time, he had the military order of the Ministry of Defense to protect him. This time, he was facing the Bureau of Proclamation, who would come down from the sky to save him and Bayulon. The day after tomorrow, the government of the Federation would secretly conduct a mecha battle test. At this time, Sula believed that the other party would not dare to use violence. He also could not allow these soldiers to arrest Secretary Bai. If the ace pilots he had secretly prepared for several months were all arrested, who would go up against that madmanly the day after tomorrow? Bayulon kept his head down and stood behind him. He did not stand in front of him to block the muzzle of the gun like he usually did. Perhaps it was because the other party's sudden attack today was related to him. He was even more silent than usual. However, when he saw Sulu angrily pull out the gun barrel, the corners of his eyes trembled slightly. He vaguely remembered the feeling of being protected by his comrades in the military camp all those years ago. The technical team members who had finished scanning the area noticed the strange movement at the door. They all walked back. After knowing the truth of the matter, their expressions changed drastically. They threw away the elegant demeanor of scholar and scolded the Bureau of Proclamation official and the soldiers. They also threatened to inform the Ministry of Defense immediately. However, it was obvious that the Ministry of Defense could not threaten the Bureau of Proclamation official. In fact, this official had only taken a document from the Bureau of Proclamation and was able to command the soldiers stationed at the Old Moon Base to do as he wished. This kind of authority was terrifying. Sulu was calling the CEO. Since the other party had used such a shameless move, other than the CEO himself, the technical team members could not think of any other way. However, the call did not go through. Whether it was the CEO or the secretary's phone, both were turned off. He narrowed his eyes. He knew that the other party must have been prepared. Perhaps the departure of the CEO was arranged by the other party. Bayulon's hands were hidden in her sleeves. Suddenly, she sighed and slowly took her hands out. From this sigh, Su Lu could hear many emotions. There was unwillingness to accept defeat, as well as helplessness and disappointment. Bayulon had joined the army when he was 15 years old. He didn't have any background or support. When he entered the Special Mecha Battalion of the 17th Armored Division, his small knife and his amazing mecha piloting skills were his true foundation. It was also because of his achievements on the front lines that he was only expelled from the army after he violated the military order. He wasn't sent to the military court, even though she was a fierce veteran. After knowing that the opponent's pilot was Madman Lee from Philadelphia, she still wanted to avoid the battle. During this journey in space, Bai Yulan had done a lot of psychological preparation. She had stimulated the most powerful part of her mental world. That was why she could calmly say those words to Su Lu at the tea table. Bai Yulan had already decided to give it her all and leave no regrets. She wanted to see just how strong the grandson of her teacher was. However, just as she was about to summon her tiger chi, she was blocked by a pack of jackals and wolves in the forest. Heroes should have a place to use their abilities. Those people wanted to shamelessly take away this opportunity from Bai Yulan when he was at his peak. That's why I had a sense of unwillingness and indifference. From the corner of Su Li's eyes, she noticed that Bai Yulan was not holding the delicate knife when she took it out of her pocket. Bai Yulan lowered her eyes and said, "I'll go with you." She had to go. The situation now was different from that rainy night. The faction led by the Federal Academy of Science was not even afraid to use their connections within the Bureau of Proclamation to prove that they were determined to win the Federation Mecha Standard Battle at all costs. Although the destruction of Jade and Stone was tragic, the problem was that the opponent had only piled up a pile of firewood. Su Lu, on the other hand, was a 1,000-year-old gem in this mecha battle. Bai Yulan could not just stand by and watch Su Lu fall into the opponent's trap because of his anger. "If you leave, what will we do?" scolded Su Lu angrily. "They just don't want me to participate in this mecha battle," said Bai Yulan softly. "At most, they'll just lock me up for a few days and I'll be fine. As for the mecha battle the day after tomorrow, you can go on your own." These last few words, Secretary Bai said them very softly. Only Su Lu, who was standing in front of her, could hear them. A strange light flashed through Su Li's eyes. He had not expected Secretary Bai to make such a suggestion. That said, Bai Yulan stretched out her hands. He knew that he was still paying back his debts for all the mistakes he had made in the military back then, as well as last autumn in Bermuda. Since the Bureau of Proclamation had appeared, they had naturally evaded the blockade of Unit 8384 and obtained evidence of his crimes directly. Who knew how many years he would be sentenced to by the Federation Court? "No need," said the Bureau of Proclamation official with a smile. He too knew the significance of the mecha battle 2 days later. He was actually not very confident, so he only asked Bai Yulan to cooperate with the investigation. He had no intention of directly arresting her. After all, he had to take care of Nutshell's emotions. Bai Yulan looked at his smile, but did not feel the need to be taken care of. She smiled gently, and then silently kicked out with her leg, striking the official's lower abdomen. With a muffled thud, the Bureau of Proclamation official fell to the ground. His face was pale. He wanted to scream in pain, but the pain pierced deep into his lower abdomen, rendering him unable to speak. This kick had startled many people present. The soldiers immediately raised their guns. At this time, Bai Yulan lowered her head and said softly, "I've already stated that I won't resist arrest. I hit him because of a personal grudge. If you want to sue me in court for fighting, I don't mind." Su Lu did not feel the slightest bit of relief from this kick. He looked silently at Bai Yulan, ignoring the official who was rolling on the ground in pain. He said, "I will get you out as soon as possible." Bai Yulan smiled slightly and said softly, "If you're angry, you need to vent. If you do things with this attitude the day after tomorrow, perhaps the results will surprise many people, including yourself." "I'm very angry." Su Lu narrowed his eyes as he looked at the white MX mecha undergoing modification in the middle of the warehouse. He thought of the little white flower that Shang Qiu had named it, and thought of Bai Yulan who had already been taken away. He said into the phone, "I've never expected the Federation to be fair, but I also didn't expect that in the face of such a situation, those people would actually dare to play politics so brazenly." After the CEO of Nutshell Mobile had returned and found out that the pilot he had chosen had been taken away by the Bureau of Proclamation, he was naturally enraged to the extreme. He had even called the president directly, but since the matter involved the Bureau of Proclamation, even the president's office had no way of ordering the other party to release the pilot immediately. He had not expected that the other party would be so shameless and direct, not caring at all about the issue of face. In his anger, he had made several calls to the Ministry of National Defense and scolded the federal military, but he still could not change the fact that had already happened. Even Nutshell Mobile's request to use this matter to delay the mecha battle was flatly rejected by the National Security Advisor in charge of this mecha test this time. At this time, Sulu was on the phone with Zoyu. On one hand, he wanted to find out what was happening on the surface of Planet S1, and on the other hand, he wanted to vent the anger in his heart. On the surface of a conflict of interest, there is often a veneer of political harmony. However, if the benefits are big enough, people are not afraid to tear off this veneer and rush forward to snatch food, just like the wild beasts in the forest on the other side of the electronic fence. On the phone, Zoyu said softly, "The battle of the MX Mecha involves a lot of benefits, and it also concerns Dean Lin's reputation in this life. He doesn't want to step down without any dignity, so naturally he won't care about these things. In the end, for you to be able to help Nutshell Mobile force the other into such a blatant ugliness is already very impressive." She glanced at the child in the nanny's arms and lowered her voice to say, "The winner is the king, and the loser is the thief. As long as the result is achieved, not many people care about the process. Right now, for you, the key is to help that little white flower win in the mecha battle the day after tomorrow. The Ministry of National Defense has urgently sent an ace pilot over," Sulu said after a moment's silence. "But the opponent is using Madman Lee. That's why I don't understand what the other side is thinking. Although the Lees of Philadelphia have always been known for their neutrality, I believe that if the madam is really willing to help Nutshell Mobile, she will definitely be able to do more. I remember Tai Zuan once said that the old director of the Bureau of Proclamation was a seventh-generation relative of his. I'm not sure about that either." Hearing Madman Lee's name, Zoyu's tone became a little more cautious. "Right now, you can only hope that the ace pilot father has chosen for you all is stronger than that secretary of yours." After hanging up the phone, Sulu walked closer to take a look at the mecha that was being modified. The engineers of Nutshell Mobile carried on with their own work with gloomy expressions. They stared at the mechanics of the main assembly base as they changed the firepower system and installed the outer armor sensor equipment without blinking. They had already arrived at the Old Moon base, but in the end, the opponent had still used underhanded means to take away their test pilot. The engineers of Nutshell Mobile all knew what this meant. Of course, they were worried that these mechanics of the main assembly base would not be too clean. Sulu walked out of the core area warehouse and asked for a cup of green tea in the living area. He leaned against the glass wall and sipped on it. Through the many layers of rigid film, he looked at the desolate but moving surface of the moon outside the base and lit a cigarette. He smoked one cigarette after another until he felt that his lips were a little numb. The smoke made him squint his eyes. Only then did he feel a little better. He remembered what Bai Yulan had said before she was taken away and lightly clenched his fists. A soft, synthesized female voice sounded, indicating that there was an external ship landing outside the main assembly base. Sulu did not pay attention to it. President Sieg and the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would be watching the mecha battle from afar in the control hall of S1 the day after tomorrow. These 2 days, the spaceships that were taking off and landing at the Old Moon base were mostly engineers and logisticians. A few minutes later, the sound of footsteps could be heard from the entrance of the underground tunnel leading from the spaceship berth to the base. These footsteps were very steady, as if a group of soldiers were marching forward. Sulu subconsciously turned his head to look, but his line of sight was blocked by the buildings. He could only see that many officers and mechanics in the living area were all walking towards the sound of the footsteps. Their faces were filled with excitement as they stood on both sides of the road. The first to enter his field of vision were the 10 or so professors from the Federal Academy of Science. It was obvious that the sound of these professors' footsteps had been drowned out by the sound of footsteps behind them. Su Li's eyes narrowed. He held his teacup and looked around the corner. Applause rang out first. The soldiers of the Old Moon base automatically stood in 2 rows to welcome the new arrival. Under the protection of several officers, the youngest lieutenant colonel in the history of the Federation walked out of the corner into the eyes of the applause and burning gazes and into Su Li's sight. For the Federal Army, the successor of the Lees of Philadelphia was already worthy of such treatment. Moreover, Mad Manly had already proven himself to be a legendary figure in the Federation with his insane battle results on the front lines in the West Woods. Su Li narrowed his eyes and looked over there. He realized that Li Feng was not as arrogant and haughty as he had seen before. The 16-year-old lieutenant colonel was gracefully bowing and thanking the applauding soldiers around him. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Mad Manly was just about to say something when he suddenly felt a gaze on him from behind. It made him feel extremely uncomfortable, so he instinctively turned his head and saw Su Li standing by the wall with a cup of green tea in his hand. Mad Manly narrowed his eyes. A hint of delight flashed across his features, like a tiger in the woods who had seen its most delicious prey. Although he had only participated in the mecha combat test to carry out the orders of the Department of National Defense, being able to defeat the mecha of the Shell Motor Company and make that fellow lose face was truly his greatest motivation. Hundreds of officers and technicians in the living quarters of the Old Moon base all noticed the gaze of the successor of the Lees of Philadelphia. They were all very curious as to who was worthy of his serious gaze. From the whispers of a few people, the crowd found out that the skinny young man standing by the wall was the technical supervisor of the Shell Motor Company. He was specifically in charge of the maintenance of the new mecha combat test this time. Under countless curious gazes, Li Feng waved his hand to stop the officers behind him from following him. He slowly walked toward Su Li, each step steady and full of awe. Su Li's figure wasn't thin, but compared to Li Feng's body that was filled with strength, he looked a little delicate. He lowered his eyes and looked at the teacup in his hand, as if he had not noticed the arrival of this person. I said before that I would kill you with my own hands, but it's a pity that you don't know how to operate a mecha. Besides, this is a military mission. Even if you are in a mecha, I can't really kill you. Li Feng said seriously, but since I'm here, your Shell Motor Company doesn't have much hope anymore. No matter how bad that purple sea from the Academy of Science is, the outcome will be the same. If such domineering words came out of someone else's mouth, they would only find it ridiculous. However, this person had gone to the front lines to kill enemies at the age of 12, piloting an M52 and slaughtering the Empire's Royal Mecha Battalion. Yet, coming out of his mouth, it sounded so natural. The original pilot was called by Yulon. A few hours ago, he was here. He promised me that he would take care of you. Su Li lowered his head and said, "Unfortunately, those bastards you're fighting for have robbed him of the chance to take care of you. Invincible in the military?" He stared at the teacup and muttered to himself, "Look at how confident you are. I suddenly want to make a bet with you." Mad Manly looked at him with a strange gaze and said, "Go ahead. If Shell Motor loses from now on, I will kneel when I see you and call you Invincible Lee. If you lose, give up the entire universe when you see me and stop bothering me. At the same time, remember to call me Uncle." Or you could take down the door sign of the Feiching Manor and give it to me. As he slowly said these words, Su Li was still staring at the green tea in his cup, as if he was staring at the ugly faces of many important people in the Federation. "Sorry, I have a slight cold and am not in good condition. But today, I wish the majority of teachers a happy holiday. Also, I recommend the new king of the realm of the skeleton spirits. Healing miracles covering the sky with one hand, forever passionate and hot-blooded." Chapter 249. Just like any scene in a play, when two people who had no standpoint and were natural enemies met each other, sparks flew in all directions amidst their calm words. The surrounding extras naturally had to express their rich inner emotions with silence and astonishment at the appropriate time. They were inexplicably surprised by the bet. The population of the Federation was in the billions and the Federal Army was in the millions. The number of heroes in history was innumerable. No one would have thought that a thin technician would say that he would dismantle the house number of the Lees of Philadelphia in front of the descendant of the god of war. Although Su Lu and Madman Li did not speak loudly, they did not deliberately avoid the surrounding crowd. The contents of the bet were clearly stated. When it fell into the ears of the crowd, how arrogant and even exaggerated was this? The arrogance of the Lees of Philadelphia had its own historical reasons and the fanatical support of the people of the Federation as its foundation. But what qualifications did this technician have to be arrogant? Sulu was an arrogant person. His mood was calm and cheerful, like an ancient mirror made of water talc. In front of a gentle person, he would be gentle, and in front of a kind person, he would be kind. Whatever the world gave him, he would give back. When he was young, he always thought that the world was beautiful, so what he showed was a happy smile with his white teeth exposed. Now that he realized that the world was not like that, his expression naturally became a little heavier. When he was in the hospital, he did not want to give in to the wild and violent Madman Li, not to mention that he was in an extremely bad mood today, so he directly confronted him. This confrontation actually caused Madman Li to be silent for a long time. The 16-year-old lieutenant colonel of the Federation slowly narrowed his eyes. A hint of cruelty flashed across his youthful face, but he immediately returned to calmness. After confirming that every word Su Lu said was true, he said, "There are countless tons of crystal ores under a man's knees. I don't want you to kneel to me. If that little white flower nutshell is crushed this time, I only ask that you never see Zhou again for the rest of your life. Don't show up in the capital ring again. Get the hell out of here as far as the Federation's warships can." It's settled then. Su Lu placed the teacup on the table and prepared to leave. He didn't want the officers of the Old Moon base to look at him like he was an idiot. With his hands behind his back, Madman Li narrowed his eyes as he watched Li Du walk towards the corridor. He suddenly said, "Perhaps you have your own reasons for being angry. Those old guys at the Academy of Science are really bastards." Su Lu stopped, but he didn't turn around. "But this has nothing to do with me. I am a soldier of the Federation. I am here to participate in the mecha duel this time because I am following orders from the Ministry of Defense. I will not be angered by this bet. Since you've stayed in a body cultivation hall before, you should be very clear that the Purple Sea's maneuverability can only be displayed in the hands of someone like me. It's best if you tell Nutshell's pilots about these things as soon as possible." Su Lu lowered his head slightly. He knew what Madman Li meant. The two of them had exchanged blows in the Lin Yuan before. Although it had only been for a split second, they could both feel each other's strength in close-range combat. Madman Li seemed to have misunderstood him as an unknown expert nurtured by that body cultivation hall. Naturally, he thought that only the two of them knew how terrifying a new generation twin-engine mecha was when a close-range combat expert was piloting it. Hearing Madman Li's words, Su Lu suddenly remembered what General Zhou Yingxing had told her before. The army was not allowed to think. The Lees of Philadelphia specialized in nurturing the most standard professional soldiers of the Federation. The 16-year-old Madman Li already had the faint feeling of military god Li Pifu from back in the day. However, he seemed to be more unbridled. This was probably the side effect of youth. However, from these few words, it was obvious that Li Feng was not a lunatic who only knew how to kill. That night, the entire Old Moon base was discussing the arrival of the successor of the Lees of Philadelphia. The legend of military god Li Pifu had gradually faded away. As for the story of the invincible Madman Li, the soldiers stationed at the Capitol Ring had only heard of it from their comrades who had retired from the front lines. Piloting an M-52 and facing off against a team of soldiers from the Imperial Royal Mecha Battalion. What kind of level was this? The thought of being able to see the operation of those mechas with their own eyes in a few dozen hours made everyone excited. In the central area of the base, the warehouse allocated to the Shell Motor Company was shrouded in a low pressure. The mixed air provided by the life support system made the technicians feel a little strange. In fact, they knew very well that this strange feeling came entirely from the gradual loss of confidence. The pilot of the Purple Sea Mecha was madmanly. The higher the reputation of this young lieutenant colonel in the military, the more helpless the technicians of the Shell Company felt. This was especially so after the Magnolia, who was chosen first, was taken away by the Bureau of Proclamation. The CEO of the Shell Company was still angrily negotiating with the government, but time was running out. That night, at 11 o'clock, another spaceship arrived at the Old Moon base from planet S1. The reserve pilot, accompanied by a team of soldiers and board members of the company, walked into the warehouse. If even this reserve pilot was taken away by the other party's tricks, the Shell Motor Company would most likely report the whole incident to the media and have a war with the government. In the dead of the night, all the technicians returned to their own rooms anxiously. The modification of the mecha program in the base had been completed. No problems were found, but they still felt a little uneasy. Sulu sat on the box under the pure, white MX mecha. He chewed on the bread in his hand and mumbled, "I really didn't expect the reserve pilot to be you." Zhou slowly chewed on the bread and smiled. "Who else can you find at the last minute? Other than that secretary of yours. I'm the most familiar with MX." This ace student of the first military college's mecha department was already drenched in sweat. Previously, he had cooperated with the technical team to perform the hot start and basic operations, which had used up some of his energy. He looked at the lonely Sulu and his heart skipped a beat. He tried to be as gentle as possible. "I know, Secretary, by as the pilot you've been secretly preparing for several months, but since the other party has used such a dirty trick, there's no other way. Now, you can only trust me and support me." Sulu did not believe Zhou Yu's ability, which was praised by the entire First Military College. However, he always thought that a pilot had to have gone through real battles before to know the taste of death and blood. Only then could the MX's super maneuverability be displayed in a swift and fierce manner. Looking at the sweaty Zhou Yu, Sulu suddenly felt that life was really strange. The first time he had piloted a mecha in battle was this officer beside him. And now, he had to snatch the control rights of Little White Flower from the other's hands. Zhou Yu did not notice Su Li's intentions. He only comforted him. Major Lan Xiaolong, who was in charge of protecting you, also knew that White Magnolia was arrested. He notified the military officer of 8,384, so you don't have to worry. Speaking of which, they're all from the 17th Armored Division. If the War God's own people were treated unfairly like this, he would definitely speak up. The military has always been very protective of its own people, but it's too late. He continued, "This time, the mecha battle standard was actually decided by the War God. Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng was conscripted by the Academy of Science. This is a kind of balance. Otherwise, anyone could see that Fei Chung was on Nutshell's side. Do you know about cultivation centers?" Sula suddenly asked. "There aren't many left in the capital ring. There are still some in Bermuda," Zhou Yu replied. After a moment of silence, Sulu said, "How confident are you against Mad Manly? How would you know if you don't fight?" Zhou Yu closed his eyes. "When the time comes, I'll go." Sulu didn't explain anything else and said very naturally. Zhou Yu stared at him in shock. For a long time, he was speechless. Outside the Capital Special District, the heavily guarded all-weather command hall of the Ministry of National Defense was already packed with people even though it was still early in the morning. The three large holographic screens in front of the hall were performing signal synchronization. Below them, countless workstations were busily performing calculations. The citizens of the Federation didn't know that in this building, a very important matter was about to be decided today. The staff in the hall had a solemn expression on their faces. The Federal Academy of Science and the Shell Motor Company each took up a large work area in the two corners of the hall. The middle area was reserved for the technical officers of the Ministry of National Defense. Behind these staff, on several rows of comfortable seats, there were already more than 20 important people in military uniforms or civilian clothes. These people could basically decide many things in the Federation, but today they could only watch the result and then passively announce the conclusion based on this result. The director of the Federal Academy of Science, Lin Yuanhu, sat in the middle of these important people. His aged face was calm. The generals and officials beside him couldn't tell if he was feeling anxious or not. As a leading figure in the academic world of the Federation, he had too many connections, supporters, and admirers in the political world. This was why so many people stood firmly behind the Academy of Science, cheering for him and helping him handle many things that he didn't want to handle personally. Looking at the battle environment of the Old Moon polar region that was gradually becoming clearer on the holographic screen, Lin Yuanhu narrowed his eyes slightly. He thought that once this was over, it was time for him to retire. Using a new generation of mecha as a closing song was a good choice. The feedback last night said that the ace pilot that had been secretly trained by the shell company for 100 days had been brought back by the Bureau of Proclamation. Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng had also started experimenting with the mecha. It seemed that there was nothing else to worry about. Below, in the Shell Motor Company's work area, Shang Xiu took off her glasses and rubbed her forehead. Looking at the technical data on the screen, she felt a headache coming on. She subconsciously turned to look at Lin Yuanhu, who was in the stands. She habitually scratched her itchy hair with the tip of her pen. She wondered if Zhou Yu would be able to force the Purple Sea into overclocking mode for 3 minutes in a mecha battle. A large military near-land spaceship landed in the Old Moon polar region of the Khaki Mountains. This region above latitude was under the direct rays of the stars all year round. The temperature was extremely high, and the terrain was extremely complex. Choosing this mountain range as the training ground for the Federation's new mecha would allow them to truly judge the combat capabilities and overall maintenance standards of the mecha from both sides. The back of the Old Moon was the base of the Federal Fleet. There was also a subsidiary base near the Khaki Mountains. 2 new mecha that carried the future of the Federal Army's new mecha were currently in the base, making the final preparations for battle testing. All the technical staff had already left. The CEO of the shell company patted Zhou Yu's shoulder with a serious expression and said, "During your graduation exam, you defeated an instructor from the 1st Academy's mecha department within 1 minute. That was an ace pilot who had won the Purple Merit Medal, so you must have confidence in yourself." A complicated expression flashed across Zhou Yu's eyes. He said softly, "Please don't worry." After the CEO left, only Zhou Yu and Su Lu were left in this area of the base. As the technical supervisor of the mecha, Su Lu still had to finalize some final parameters and set up the monitoring authority. In the eerily quiet environment, Zhou Yu glanced at the white MX mecha that was 7 meters tall in front of him and suddenly asked, "Do you have confidence?" This was the question Su Lu had asked him the night before. Zhou Yu really wanted to know how he would answer. Su Lu closed the control panel on the ground and said calmly, "Against Madman Li, I don't have the slightest bit of confidence." After a moment of silence, he added, "But I have the determination." Zhou Yu looked at the back of the figure that was dragging the heavy black box and climbing up the mecha. Suddenly, he said loudly, "You really are a lunatic. I can't believe I actually agreed to let you go. I'm also a lunatic. Don't forget, the person we're going to face today is a lunatic." Su Lu did not turn his head as he replied loudly. Zhou Yu had come from the West Woods to the capital to study. Along the way, he had been branded with the mark of excellence. Thus, he had become increasingly steady and gentle, never making a single mistake. Until the night before, when he had heard Su Li's request, he had discovered that he could occasionally go a little crazy. Watching Su Lu crawl into the cockpit, he suddenly felt that this kind of craziness might be exchanged for a very good result. After all, this fellow's talent in the field of mecha was indeed very frightening. Closing the cockpit door and opening the black box, he took out the simulation system and installed it. Then, he connected the cable to the MX Mecha's standard interface. This was originally a data channel that Shang Xiu had reserved for him at his suggestion during the final design phase. The warm-up of the mecha had long been completed. Sulu quietly looked at the feedback of the mecha's data from his helmet. Feeling the slight numbness on his skin, he gently pressed down on the red button. According to the privacy regulations of the First Charter, a pilot's personal operation data could be kept confidential. For the ace pilots of the military, those skills that were exclusive to them were things that they had exchanged for with their lives. Unless the military conscripted them, no one could even dream of spying on their operations. Even the command hall watching from hundreds of thousands of kilometers away was no exception. Thus, Sulu was not worried that his use of the simulation system would be discovered by others. In fact, this was also one of the things he relied on to participate in the mecha battle and face Mad Manly head-on. Perhaps someone would detect something from the way he operated the mecha and bring him some unknown danger, but he already did not care. Almost at the same time, in the underground base of the Kaki Mountains, in the Old Moon Assembly Base, in the S1 Capital Command Hall, the sound of an electronic countdown rang out. 10, 9, 8, 7. Sulu calmly listened to the electronic countdown. His left hand was on the control stick, and his right hand was on the touchscreen. This idea of mixing two control methods was probably only an unconventional engineer like him would dare to try. As the last chime rang out, the lights below the base dimmed for a moment. The sound of air leakage whistled, but it could not reach the inside of the mecha. The alloy hatch at the top of the base took 2 seconds to open. The load-bearing lift platform below slowly transported the heavy white MX mecha to the surface of the moon. The vision of reality merged with the light green capture system and appeared in the window of the helmet. Sulu narrowed his eyes. As far as the eye could see, he could only see light all around him. The windless and dust-free Kaki Mountains were bathed in the blazing light. It was a scene of tranquility and danger. The central control computer of the MX mecha had already issued a warning. A vacuum environment was a very severe test for the life support system. Fortunately, the MX mecha had considered this point when it was designed for combat. Even if the exterior of the mecha was damaged, the internal cockpit could still ensure an independent life support system. It was just that it could not be maintained for too long. Beep, 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 beep. A series of sharp alarms rang out. In a field of vision where the light was the brightest, a light purple mecha suddenly appeared. Under the blazing light, the two newest MX mecha of the Federation in the Kaki Mountains appeared even more holy in their white reflections, while the purple appeared even more demonic and murderous. After the two mecha had been transported out of the base, the distance between them was only 200 meters. For a cheetah, it would only take a few breaths to reach its prey. However, for a new mecha with dual-engine technology and 4 times the power output, this distance was actually a little frighteningly short. The Purple Sea mecha moved, its dual engines at full power. One moment it was still far away. The next it had already turned into a purple shadow and was charging over. The instant the little white flower mecha set foot on the surface of the moon, Sulu, who was completely focused, had discovered the figure of the purple mecha standing proudly in the light before the onboard radar. Being able to see it with the naked eye was naturally more direct than being able to see it with the radar. However, he had not expected that Madman Lee, operating the Purple Sea mecha, would make his move so swiftly and valiantly. In fact, he had not even chosen to attack with long-range weapons right from the start, instead intending to engage in close-range mecha combat at close range. The right arm of the white mecha had long been raised horizontally, and the hanging weapons mounted on the side of the mecha's arm began to spew wildly. However, the firepower systems of both mecha had already been modified by the final assembly base into low-light marking weapons used in training exercises. In addition, there was no air on the surface of the moon, so it was very difficult to hear those crisp and beautiful clicking sounds. However, at the same time that the little white flower mecha launched its long-range attack, the Purple Sea mecha, which was charging forward at unparalleled speed, made a preemptive judgment. Its heavy mechanical legs stomped viciously on a protruding moon rock, and the mecha's body moved in an extremely strange and powerful manner as it forcefully turned to avoid those beams of light that represented lethality, preventing the sensors on the mecha's body from receiving any signal of damage. In just an instant, the Purple Sea Mecha had already broken through the blockade of long-range firepower and arrived in front of Sulu. Without hesitation, it silently and coldly used its hard alloy fists to punch towards the abdomen of the little white flower mecha. The massive inertia of the heavy mecha, the strong initial startup speed of the twin engines, and the evasive maneuverability under quadruple power were all used to their fullest by Madman Lee, who was operating the Purple Sea Mecha. Using the simplest of movements, it created the most dangerous moment. The Purple Sea Mecha's advance had left behind a trail of light dust on the moon rock, but before it could even touch the purple surface of the mecha, the killing blow had arrived in an instant. A moment later, a cloud of dust had descended. Near the Kaki Mountains, countless data collectors had been installed. The mecha of both sides also had monitoring equipment installed by the final assembly base. In addition, there were 7 highly sensitive satellites positioned above the polar regions of the old moon. These equipment faithfully transmitted everything that happened on the battlefield back to the conference room at the old moon base, as well as to the command hall on Planet S, hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. The instant the electronic countdown ended, everyone in the command hall fell silent for a moment. They stared at the 2 new mecha standing 200 meters apart on the giant screen. No one spoke, not even making a sound. No matter which side the technicians in the command hall belonged to, no matter which side those big shots watching the battle supported, at least in this moment, they all had the same feeling. No matter what standard the Federation adopted for the new mecha, and no matter what the competing interests behind the scenes were, at least they were very honored to be able to witness the first real battle of the Federation's epic-making new mecha. The light on the screen was very intense, but the white and purple of the 2 mechas' exterior appeared even more intense due to the reflection of the light. The people in the command hall stared unblinkingly at the screen. Only after a moment did those technicians come to their senses and prepare to begin data collection. This was the first real battle of the new MX mecha. The technical parameters displayed by both sides in this battle would not only serve as a judgment for any possible disputes, but more importantly, this was a good opportunity for the Federation to collect data on the mecha. However, the technicians did not have time to do the work of data collection, nor did they have time to use the data to analyze the operating efficiency of the MX mecha's 3 major systems in a vacuum environment. Thus, they could only turn their gazes back to the screen. Because the Purple Sea Mecha had moved, and the moment it moved with such power that it could swallow mountains and rivers, full of dominance. Its speed was unimaginably fast. The Federation had been developing mecha for many years. Mecha were renowned for their high mobility, but no one had ever imagined that on the craggy surface environment of the old moon, a mecha could actually display such terrifying speed. This sort of instantaneous activation speed and the wondrous acceleration that followed could be the change brought about by the twin engines. Everyone was aware of this point, but no one had time to sigh, because everything had happened too quickly. The roar of the Purple Sea Mecha's twin engines could not be collected. However, the people in the command hall felt as if they were on the old moon, watching the Purple Sea Mecha roar away with their own eyes, as fast as lightning. Using this sort of speed to display a revolutionary breakthrough in mecha development. Shang Qiu stared wide-eyed and slack-jawed at the purple mecha charging forward at high speed on the screen, her hands gripping her pen tightly. As a key figure in the formation of dual-engine technology, she knew better than anyone else just what kind of speed a mecha could reach when the dual-engine technology was operating at full power. However, that was just data from the laboratory tests under a simulated environment. Today, seeing the dual-engine mecha in action for real, she was still so shocked that she could not find words to describe it. Speed. The only thing that determined a mecha's performance and close combat power could only be speed. On the screen, The white mecha tried to use long-range firepower to seal off the path of the purple mecha. However, in the face of the terrifying speed of the purple sea mecha and the valiant operation of the pilot, the few weak beams of light that represented the firing line appeared so futile and weak. This was the frightening part of the new twin-engine mecha. Under the protection of supermobility, the inherent firepower system of the universe was already outdated. If the firing speed of mechanical weapons and the tracking speed of standard missiles could no longer match the instantaneous evasive speed of the mecha, then how could they injure or destroy it? The high-speed movement of the purple sea mecha on the holographic screen, leaving behind only an afterimage, made clear to everyone in the Old Moon Base's conference room and command hall of fact. In future battles, unless it was a concentrated firepower or a precise beam attack from a battleship, the MX mecha would be a super weapon that would be very difficult to surround or defeat. The instinctive excitement of an engineer flashed through Shang Chio's mind. She stared blankly at the screen. Her fingers had not yet finished exerting force when she saw the purple sea mecha charging in front of Little White Flower. She was very worried whether the Nutshell MX mecha would be defeated by this attack. But what shocked her even more was that the pilot controlling the Purple Sea had only used 2 days and 2 nights to master the control system of the twin-engine mecha to such perfection. He had completely taken advantage of the speed advantage of the new MX mecha, abandoning the original federal military mecha movements to pursue close combat instead of long-range attacks. The Lees of Philadelphia were indeed geniuses on the battlefield. Only a genius mecha warrior would dare to completely abandon the original mecha control method in his first real battle and rely on his instincts to change his battle strategy at the last minute to maximize the mobility of the twin-engine mecha. This choice undoubtedly proved that the crazy person in the Purple Sea mecha had extraordinary calmness and strong confidence in himself. The officers and technicians in the command hall who were watching the screen stared dumbfoundedly at the brilliant purple light. Looking at the speed of the mecha that the Federation had never produced before, they did not have time to react. They did not have time to analyze any data before they subconsciously made a judgment. The battle between the two MX mecha seemed to have just started and was about to end. The military bigwigs behind the command hall who stood up after being shocked by the speed of the Purple Sea mecha were also thinking the same thing. Even if the Nutshell pilot was the best ace pilot in the federal military, in the face of the violent and swift attacks of the Purple Sea mecha, he would definitely not be able to make the most correct response. The white mecha that was obviously still defending against long-range attacks and close combat would be like its codename Little White Flower in the next moment, swaying and shattering in the vacuum of Old Moon Mount Khaki. The strong mechanical arm took up a quarter of the field of vision. The glossy purple exterior reflected the light of the stars. The fiercely contracting joint components and transmission pipes were so clear and were getting bigger and bigger. Sulu had always thought that madman Lee had only been in contact with the MX mecha for 2 days and could not be more familiar with it than himself. But seeing the scene, he knew that he was wrong. Under such circumstances, even the fastest reaction speed of a federal military pilot would not be able to allow Little White Flower to make the correct response. But he could, because his nerves were thicker than others, and his reaction was faster than others. In the dark cockpit, his fingers quickly swept across the screen, and at the same time, the warm energy in his body also burst forth in an instant. Through the simulation system on his body, it sent precise signals to every component of the mecha. The alloy fist of the Purple Sea mecha was enough to defeat the enemy in one hit. With the huge force and high speed of the sprint, it seemed impossible to dodge. So Little White Flower did not dodge. Instead, at the moment when the alloy fist was about to hit its body, its left mechanical leg stepped back and its right mechanical arm struck out as fast as lightning. In a vacuum environment, the alloy fist of the Purple Sea mecha could not make the sound of air exploding. But that fist that broke through the air and landed in the eyes of everyone watching the foot of Mount Khaki was mixed with endless dominance and murderous intent. Little White Flower's mecha moved, but its movement was hurried and helpless. As if it had been blown by a strong wind, its waist twisted slightly. But it was this seemingly helpless twist that the purple sea mecha's fist, which had been charging up for a long time, brushed past the left side of the white mecha's chest and collided directly with that mechanical arm that had appeared out of nowhere. The two strong alloy fists collided heavily. In this instant, it seemed that the hard alloy surface could be seen slowly deforming under this impact, revealing the complex internal components. When the mecha collided, there was no sound. This scene fell into everyone's eyes like a clap of thunder, waking everyone up. Non-standard movements. In the ground command hall, the invited dean of the 1st Military Academy's Mobility Department leaned on the railing. His eyes narrowed as he watched the two mecha collide for the first time on the holographic screen. He said in a low voice, "All non-standard movements." No one paid attention to what he was saying. Everyone was staring at the holographic screen, dumbfounded. If it was said that Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng, who was piloting the Purple Sea Mecha, was able to use the new MX Mecha's functions to the maximum in a short period of time because of his identity as the descendant of the war god, this was an amazing but acceptable feat, but the pilot sent by the Nutshell Company to operate the White Mecha was actually able to make an effective response in such a short period of time. Although it was a bit embarrassing, it had successfully blocked the Purple Sea Mecha's domineering attack. This made everyone unable to believe their own eyes. How fast is the hand speed required to do this? Most of the people in the command hall were professionals. Although they had not personally operated the new mecha, they knew that under the Purple Sea Mecha's domineering attack, the reaction time left for the White Mecha pilot was very short. To be able to continuously input commands to operate the mecha to make the only feasible response in such a short period of time, what kind of hand speed and vision did this require? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.